Unveiling ancient Egypt's mysteries. Beneath the golden sands of Egypt lies a world not fully understood, a civilization that built monuments so precise, so impossibly grand, that even with all our modern knowledge, we still cannot fully explain how or why they were made. The more we uncover, the more elusive the truth becomes. What ancient knowledge has been lost beneath the shifting desert winds? What secrets are still sealed behind walls of stone, hidden in hieroglyphs or buried in tombs that time forgot? Why was the Great Pyramid aligned with such astronomical precision? Who lies in the tomb that was never found? What strange force compelled entire cities to vanish without a trace? For every answer Egypt has given us, 100 more questions rise from the dust. This isn't just history, it's a puzzle, a story half told and the pieces still missing may change everything we thought we knew about the ancient world. So sit back, relax, and let's dive deep into the shadows of the Nile, where mystery lingers in every stone and the past refuses to stay buried. The Abbidos flying machines. Deep within the ancient sandstone walls of the Temple of Seti I in the sacred city of Abydos lies a detail so small that it's often missed by the casual visitor. And yet it may be one of the most perplexing carvings in all of Egypt. The temple, built over 3,000 years ago to honor the memory of Seti I, father of the famed Ramses the Great, is a place heavy with silence. Columns rise like stone sentinels. Hieroglyphs whisper through time. And in a high-ceiling beam near the hypostyle hall, something strange catches the eye. Among the rows of traditional symbols etched into the lintel, ankhs, falcons, royal cartouches, there is a cluster of carvings that seem distinctly out of place, shapes that to the modern eye resemble helicopters, submarines, and aircraft with swept wings. Not abstract or symbolic, but unmistakably mechanical, detailed, proportional, and eerily familiar. These are the so-called Abbidos flying machines. How could such imagery appear in a temple carved more than 3,000 years ago? Could it be coincidence, illusion, or something else entirely? The official explanation is grounded in the complexities of hieroglyphic evolution. Over centuries, temples were reused, and inscriptions often overwritten. Egyptologists suggest that the peculiar shapes are the result of palimpsest carving, where newer hieroglyphs were etched over older ones, and the plaster or stone in between eventually eroded. What we're left with, they argue, is an accidental composite, a layering of hieroglyphs that, when partially weathered, just happens to resemble modern aircraft. It's an elegant solution, logical, technical. But then again, the lines are so crisp, the proportions so specific, the resemblance so striking that even seasoned researchers find themselves pausing in thought. How likely is it that random erosion and overlapping symbols could produce such clear silhouettes, so modern in form, so evocative of machines that wouldn't exist until the 20th century? Could it be pareidolia, the brain's tendency to see patterns where none exist? Or might it hint at something else, something less easily dismissed? Some fringe theorists have stepped into that space of uncertainty, proposing more radical interpretations. Could the ancient Egyptians have preserved knowledge of advanced technology? Could they have recorded sightings of objects that defy conventional understanding? From time to time, stories emerge of lost civilizations, of ancient visitors from the stars, of forbidden knowledge sealed away beneath desert sands. These are ideas often relegated to the outer edge of historical inquiry, yet they persist whispered across decades, feeding the curiosity of those who feel history might still be hiding something. Still, there is no hard evidence of flight in ancient Egypt. No engines, no wreckage, no mechanical debris buried beneath the Nile's floodplain. And yet the image remains etched into stone, silently asking the same question decade after decade. What did the ancients see? The Temple of Seti I itself adds another layer of enigma. Abbidos was not just any city, it was considered one of Egypt's holiest sites, a place of resurrection and the afterlife, the mythical burial place of Osiris. The entire region pulses with spiritual significance. Could the carvings have been symbolic representations of divine vehicles, metaphors for the journey between life and death? Could the shapes we see as helicopters be stylized solar boats or sacred chariots drawn from the realm of myth? Interpretations vary depending on perspective. Some look at the carving and see coincidence. Others see evidence of a lost chapter in human history. What's undeniable is this. The Abbidos helicopter has become more than a curiosity. It's a symbol of the vast unknown still locked within the walls of ancient Egypt. A reminder that for all we've discovered, we're still only scratching the surface. So we return to Abbidos, to the temple of Seti, to a quiet beam high above a sacred hall where time has blurred meanings and left us with a puzzle carved in stone. And we ask ourselves, is this merely erosion and coincidence or something we have yet to understand? The past speaks softly here. It does not shout. It leaves symbols, hints, fragments, and whether those fragments form the face of a god or the outline of a flying machine is a mystery that continues to unfold one grain of sand at a time. The Saqqara Stone Jars. The desert winds whisper through the ancient necropolis of Saqqara, a vast burial ground stretching south of Cairo, where the sands hold secrets older than history itself. Here, in the shadow of the step pyramid of Djoser, something quietly defies explanation. Nestled within a network of underground chambers and dusty courtyards lie objects few speak of and even fewer understand. A collection of massive stone jars, impossibly heavy, precisely carved, and strangely out of place. These jars are not small, some weigh several tons, carved from hard stone like granite or diorite. Materials so dense that even with modern tools shaping them would require time, effort, and sophisticated technique. Their surfaces are smooth to the touch with perfectly symmetrical interiors, and in some cases lids that fit with uncanny precision. To see them in person is to feel a sense of deep incongruity. These are not decorative urns or ordinary vessels. They seem functional, but their function is unknown. They appear engineered, yet no tool marks are visible. They are too large for domestic use, too refined for mere storage, and too heavy to have been easily moved. And so the questions begin. What were they made for? Who carved them, and how? Mainstream archaeologists suggest they may have served a ritual purpose, perhaps used to store sacred oils, water, or offerings to the gods. Others believe they were symbolic containers, part of the elaborate funerary customs that govern death and rebirth in ancient Egypt. Saqqara was, after all, a gateway to the afterlife, a city of the dead, where the physical and spiritual worlds converged. Yet these explanations, while plausible, leave much unanswered. Why would such incredible effort and precision be applied to simple storage vessels? Why use granite or diorite, materials harder than steel on the Mohs scale, when softer stones would have sufficed? And above all, how were they made? Inscriptions are few. The jars are rarely marked, offering no direct clues to their origin. Some appear in underground galleries believed to date back over 4,000 years, placing them in the early dynastic or Old Kingdom periods. And yet, the level of precision seems to outpace the conventional tools of the time: copper chisels, dolerite pounders, and primitive lathes. Could these jars have been crafted using techniques we've lost or no longer recognize? Some engineers who have examined the symmetry and polish of these vessels raise eyebrows at the level of craftsmanship, noting tolerances and smoothness that rival modern machining. A lathe, perhaps, but where is the evidence? No ancient Egyptian machine tools have ever been found. From this silence, speculation grows. Some suggest the jars were part of a lost technological tradition, one capable of manipulating stone at a level we have yet to fully comprehend. Others go further, wondering if we are glimpsing remnants of a civilization that predates dynastic Egypt, a culture whose traces have been buried or erased by time. There are even those who whisper of ancient power sources, of sound-based shaping methods, or of knowledge handed down from forgotten origins. And yet, without firm evidence, these theories remain speculative, fringes of a narrative that continues to elude closure. What we do know is that these jars are not unique to Saqqara. Similar vessels, massive, smooth, and out of context, have been found at other sites across Egypt, in temples, in tombs, sometimes even in isolation, without a clear connection to any structure. They recur like a pattern without an explanation, a riddle carved in stone, and always the same unanswered question lingers. Were they ceremonial objects imbued with symbolic power, part of a now lost religious rite? Or were they containers for something long since vanished? substances, energies, or objects no longer part of our world. The air in Sakura is thick with heat and silence. The stone breathes slowly, remembering things no longer spoken aloud. The ancient jars, untouched by time, sit like silent sentinels. Their purpose erased, but their presence undeniable. They do not explain themselves, they do not offer clues. They simply are, unmoving, unmoved, carved with purpose. But for what purpose? No one truly knows. Perhaps their mystery lies not just in what they are, but in what they represent, the vast unknown still hidden beneath Egypt's sands. A reminder that beneath every tomb, behind every sealed chamber, and within every carved vessel, there may be truths we are not yet ready or able to understand. So we leave Saqqara for now, the sun dipping behind limestone ruins, shadows stretching long across the desert floor. The jars remain where they have always been waiting for another eye to study them, another mind to ask the question, what did they once hold? And what knowledge might still lie sealed within their perfect silent stone? The disappearance of Hatshepsut's mummy. As we leave the stillness of Sakura behind, our path leads us south along the Nile to the cliffs of Deir el-Bahari. Here, carved into the rugged limestone face of the Theban mountains, stands one of ancient Egypt's most astonishing architectural achievements, the mortuary temple of Hatshepsut. Graceful colonnades rise in perfect symmetry against the cliffside, their clean lines and serene proportions, unlike anything else in the ancient world. It is a place that radiates order, reverence, and imperial ambition. Yet behind this facade of grandeur lies one of the strangest and most persistent mysteries of ancient Egypt: the disappearance of Hatshepsut's mummy. Hatshepsut was no ordinary pharaoh. She ruled Egypt for over 2 decades during the 15th century BC, one of the few women to take the title of king. She wore the ceremonial beard, used the masculine pronouns, and portrayed herself in the guise of a male ruler to legitimize her reign. Under her leadership, Egypt prospered, monuments were built, trade flourished, and peace endured. Her temple at Deir el-Bahari was a declaration of her power and legacy intended to enshrine her memory for eternity. But eternity, it seems, had other plans. For centuries, her mummy was missing. Despite the prominence of her reign, Hatshepsut's final resting place remained uncertain. Her tomb, KV 20 deep within the Valley of the Kings, was known. But when it was opened, it was found empty. No royal mummy, no sarcophagus bearing her name, only fragments as if someone had deliberately removed her remains, or worse, erased her. Was this a case of simple tomb robbery common throughout Egypt's long and turbulent history? Or was something more intentional at work? The evidence began to suggest the latter. Toward the end of her reign, and especially after her death, Hatshepsut's memory was systematically suppressed. Her images were defaced, her cartouches chiseled out, her statues toppled. But unlike the usual damnatio memoriae aimed at disgraced rulers, Hatshepsut's erasure was curiously delayed, coming not immediately but years later, during the reign of her stepson and successor, Thutmose III. Historians have long debated the motives. Was it political revenge from a son who had been denied his rightful rule? An effort to reassert traditional male dominance? Or was it part of a broader theological shift, aiming to erase a precedent that challenged the divine order of kingship? Whatever the motive, the result was profound. Hatshepsut vanished from the historical record, and it seemed from the physical world as well. The search for her mummy stretched across centuries. Dozens of unidentified female remains were studied, tombs re-examined. Some speculated that her body might have been destroyed entirely, lost to fire, looters, or deliberate desecration. Others hoped that her remains might have been secretly reburied, hidden by loyal priests or courtiers desperate to preserve her legacy. Then in the early 2000s, attention turned to a small, neglected tomb known as KV 60. Inside were 2 mummies, one in a coffin marked with the name of Hatshepsut's nurse, Sitra. The other lay unceremoniously on the floor, unmarked and forgotten. She had once been dismissed as unimportant, but new forensic techniques gave her a second chance. In a stroke of luck, a box inscribed with Hatshepsut's cartouche had been found in a cache of embalming materials. Inside it, a molar tooth. When researchers compared the tooth with the CT scans of the unidentified mummy from KB60, the fit was close enough to raise eyebrows. Had they finally found the lost queen? The announcement made headlines. It was a compelling story. A missing mummy rediscovered not by tomb robbers or ancient rituals, but by dental evidence and modern science. And yet not all experts were convinced. The match was not conclusive. The box could have been symbolic. The tooth from another individual. The mummy herself showed signs of obesity, diabetes, and possibly bone cancer, conditions rarely associated with the divine ideal of the pharaohs. Was it really her? Or had science stretched too far, seduced by the desire for closure? Today, the mummy identified as Hatshepsut rests in the Cairo Museum, but the mystery remains unsettled. If this truly is the queen, why was she found outside her own tomb, stripped of the grandeur her status deserved? Why was she hidden in a nurse's burial chamber without inscriptions or honors? Was she buried in secret to protect her from enemies, or quietly discarded by those seeking to erase her legacy? And if it isn't her, then where is she? The temple at Deir el-Bahari still gazes across the desert, its colonnades casting long shadows in the afternoon light. It was built to immortalize a ruler who defied tradition, ruled as a man, and reshaped the image of power. But even stone cannot guarantee remembrance. In the end, her body may have been lost, her name nearly erased, and her memory buried under the weight of political agendas. And yet her mystery endures. Perhaps that's her final act of defiance, not merely ruling in life, but continuing to command wonder centuries after her death. So we ask, is Hatshepsut truly home at last, or still waiting somewhere beneath the sand for her story to be told in full? The Enigma of Pharaoh I, just beyond the Valley of the Kings, hidden among jagged cliffs scorched by centuries of sun, lies a tomb often overlooked by the stream of tourists and scholars who come searching for the grandeur of Egypt's most famous pharaohs. It is modest compared to the tombs of Ramesses or Seti, and far less elaborate than the golden legacy of Tutankhamun. But within its weathered stone lies a mystery that refuses to fade, the story of Pharaoh I, a man who rose from the shadows to seize the throne of Egypt, and whose true role in one of history's most dramatic transitions remains cloaked in ambiguity. A was not born to rule. His origins are elusive, his bloodline uncertain. Some believe he was a high-ranking court official, perhaps of non-royal lineage, who rose steadily through the ranks under Amenhotep III in Akhenaten. He bore titles of great importance: vizier, master of the horse, and later father of the god, suggesting a powerful connection to the royal family. His name appears throughout the Amarna period, etched into temple walls and court records, always close to the throne, always watching. And then, without warning, he became pharaoh. After the sudden and mysterious death of the boy king Tutankhamun around 1303 BC, A assumed the throne. He was old by then, perhaps in his 60s or 70s, an unusual age to begin a reign in a kingdom defined by youthful divine kings. But the line of succession was murky. Tutankhamun had left no surviving heirs. The power vacuum was immediate, and I stepped in. Was it duty or ambition? Officially, I married Tutankhamun's widow, Ankhesenamun, in what may have been a strategic move to legitimize his rule. But even that union is wrapped in mystery. Her name disappears from the records soon after the marriage. No inscriptions, no tomb, no clear mention. Did she die unexpectedly? Was she silenced, or did she resist? What we do know is that I's reign was brief, only around 4 years, and marked by a quiet return to tradition. He continued the religious restoration begun under Tutankhamun, steering Egypt further away from the monotheistic experiment of Akhenaten and back into the arms of the traditional gods. He built temples, commissioned monuments, and left behind modest but deliberate traces of kingship, and then he vanished. His tomb, WV-23, is carved deep into the western arm of the Valley of the Kings. It's unfinished. The decoration is sparse, the artwork hurried. For a man who ruled Egypt, it feels oddly incomplete. Some walls show signs of being altered mid-construction. Certain sections look like they were repurposed from earlier plans. The burial chamber bears scenes of the Book of the Dead, but the quality lacks the finesse seen in the tombs of longer reigning kings. Even more curious is what or who was found inside. When British archaeologist Edward Ayrton discovered the tomb in 1905, it had already been robbed in antiquity. The sarcophagus was there, but broken. Fragments of a mummy were scattered across the floor, along with items stripped of gold and valuable inlays. There was no clear identification, no definitive evidence that the remains belonged to A. And more unsettling still, some scholars believe the tomb may not have even been built for him. Some suggest it may have originally been intended for a queen. Others speculate that it was hastily reassigned to Ai after a more prestigious burial was denied or perhaps even revoked. But why? Was Ai simply too old to establish a legacy? Or had he made enemies powerful enough to strip him of royal honors after his death? Theories abound. One of the most persistent centers around his relationship with Tutankhamun. Some suggest Ai played a role in the young pharaoh's untimely death, perhaps even orchestrating it to seize power. There's no direct evidence, only silence where there should be records. A rapid ascension, a sudden royal marriage, and the disappearance of a queen. It paints a shadowy picture, but one difficult to verify. And what of A's legacy? It was swiftly dismantled by his successor, Horemheb, a former general who would go on to erase not only Ai, but much of the entire Amarna period from Egypt's official history. Monuments were defaced, names were scrubbed away, statues were smashed. Horemheb positioned himself as the rightful restorer of order, and in doing so, he ensured that Ai and others would fade into obscurity. But Ai's presence lingers in temple reliefs where his name was later chiseled out, in the strange quiet of his tomb, unfinished and almost forgotten, and in the uneasy gaps between Egypt's most turbulent dynastic years. What did Ai see during his time in court? What role did he truly play in the collapse of Akhenaten's revolution, in the death of Tutankhamun, in the restoration of the old gods? Was he a stabilizing force amid chaos, or a manipulator who seized power in a time of weakness? And most importantly, what happened to him? As we walk the corridors of WV-23 past the faded gods and cracked stone, it's difficult to separate the man from the myth. Pharaoh I remains a figure half revealed, caught between eras, between gods, between the lines of history. And so his story joins the others. A whisper carried through the Valley of the Kings, a chapter obscured by time, still waiting for its final lines to be uncovered. The Osirian at Abbidos. As the shadow of Pharaoh I fades into the deeper corridors of lost history, we return once more to the realm where myth and archaeology blur, a place where story and structure intertwine, and the divine walks hand in hand with the dead. We now descend into one of ancient Egypt's most enigmatic puzzles, the tombs, or perhaps temples of Osiris. In the bedrock beneath the ancient necropolis of Abbidos, a dark stairway carved into the limestone leads to a multi-leveled chamber. The deeper one goes, the colder the air becomes, the more silent the world above seems to vanish. And at the bottom, submerged in black water and eternal stillness, lies a stone structure many believe to be the symbolic tomb of Osiris, the god of the afterlife, the lord of the dead, the one who was slain and resurrected in the earliest mythologies of Egypt. This site, discovered in the early 20th century but only thoroughly explored in recent decades, is often called the Osirian. Hidden just behind the majestic temple of Seti I, the Osirian is a subterranean megalithic complex unlike anything else in the region. Enormous granite blocks, some weighing over 50 tons, form a central chamber surrounded by a deep trench of water. Stone pillars rise from the flooded floor like remnants of a sunken world. No inscriptions, no names, no clear purpose. It does not match the architectural style of Seti's temple above it. In fact, it appears far older. Mainstream Egyptologists suggest it was built during Seti's reign, perhaps as a symbolic representation of the underworld, aligned with the cult of Osiris. But the precision and scale of the stonework, coupled with the stark contrast in style, have led many to question whether it predates the temple itself. Could Seti have merely constructed his monument atop a far older sacred site? Across Egypt, Abbidos was always seen as the spiritual heart of Osiris worship. Ancient pilgrims traveled here to take part in the Osirian mysteries, ritual reenactments of the god's death, dismemberment, and resurrection. Osiris, they believed, had once been buried in Abydos, and to die and be buried nearby was to be spiritually reborn in his divine company. But here the mystery deepens. for Abbidos is not the only place where the god's tomb was believed to rest. Far to the north on the Giza plateau, home to the pyramids, the Sphinx, and endless enigmas of its own, lies another subterranean chamber, largely forgotten for decades. Beneath the causeway of the Pyramid of Kafra, a deep vertical shaft plunges into the bedrock. At its base, archaeologists have uncovered what some call a second Osiris tomb, a complex network of tunnels, burial chambers, and a large granite sarcophagus set within a symbolic island surrounded by a moat-like trench, evoking unmistakable parallels to the Abbidos Oeran. It was dubbed the Tomb of Osiris by the archaeologist who investigated it in the 1990s. While no inscriptions name the god directly, the layout and design echo the mythological descriptions of Osiris's burial in Egyptian texts. An island in a subterranean water basin symbolizing the primeval waters of creation. Two tombs, two chambers, two silent sanctuaries devoted to the same deity, yet separated by hundreds of miles and built in different epochs for purposes still uncertain. Were these purely symbolic structures, ritual centers used in sacred dramas to honor the myth of death and resurrection? Or were they attempts to mark something deeper, something literal? Some fringe researchers have gone further, suggesting that the dual tombs may hint at a lost memory, a real individual whose story evolved over millennia into the legend of Osiris. Others propose that the water-filled basins and monumental stonework represent forgotten technologies or knowledge tied to astronomical cycles, earth energies, or sacred geography. Mainstream scholars remain cautious. The Oeran at Abbidos, they argue, while megalithic in form, fits within the broader symbolic landscape of Seti's religious reforms. And the Giza tomb, they maintain, was likely a high-ranking official's unfinished burial site that became mythologized over time. And yet the silence of the stones is unnerving. Why are there no inscriptions? Why the immense effort to create watery, hidden sanctuaries beneath the earth? Why the echo of the same design across such great distances? If these structures were never meant for human eyes, hidden deep underground, known only to initiates, then what purpose did they serve? Were they gates to the afterlife, metaphysical machines of transformation, or something else entirely? Today, the Osiris at Abbidos remains partially submerged, its massive stones darkened by time and moisture. The chamber beneath Giza sits mostly untouched, closed to the public and rarely discussed. Two sites, each whispering a forgotten truth, each daring us to look beyond what we think we know. Osiris was the god who transcended death, the first to die and the first to rise again. In a land obsessed with eternity, he was the promise of rebirth, the still point in a turning world. And perhaps it is no coincidence that his tomb remains just beyond our reach. So we are left to wonder, were these dual tombs monuments to myth or clues to something more? Could they mark the memory of a real death, a real burial, and a secret the ancient priests never meant to share? As with so many of Egypt's mysteries, the answer lies not in what is said, but in what remains unsaid, in the empty chambers, in the silent stone, in the water that still laps at the base of a forgotten god's tomb. The Valley Temple of Kafra. As we leave behind the silent, water-filled tombs said to belong to the god of the underworld, Osiris, we now emerge onto the sun-bleached limestone plateau of Giza. Here the desert stretches wide and bare, the horizon fractured by three colossal pyramids that have stood for more than 4 millennia. And at their feet, half buried in sand and time, rests a structure that is neither tomb nor temple in the traditional sense, but something far stranger and perhaps even older. This is the Valley Temple of Kafra. Set at the southeastern edge of the Giza Plateau near the base of the Great Sphinx, the Valley Temple is a monument of geometric purity. Massive limestone and granite blocks, some weighing more than 100 tons, are fitted together with such precision that even a razor blade cannot slip between them. The surfaces are polished smooth, the corners sharp, the alignment flawless. The structure seems to radiate an eerie stillness as if it was never truly meant for the living. The temple is traditionally attributed to Khafre, the 4th dynasty pharaoh who built the second largest pyramid at Giza, and is widely believed to be the face of the Great Sphinx. Archaeologists date the temple to around 2500 BC, noting its alignment with the mortuary complex and causeway that lead to Kafra's pyramid. Its architectural layout follows a basic orthogonal plan: two massive halls flanked by side chambers with towering columns and a central court bathed in sunlight. But something doesn't quite fit. Unlike the grandeur of the pyramid itself, the Valley Temple feels stark, almost preternaturally austere. There are no inscriptions, no decorative reliefs, no hieroglyphic text to explain its purpose. The walls are blank, the chambers silent. It is a temple without a voice, and this silence has given rise to deep questions. Why would a king like Kafra, who left behind a massive pyramid and the enigmatic Sphinx, build a temple so grand in form, yet so void of narrative? Was it meant to be functional, perhaps used for mummification rites or ceremonial purification? Or did it serve a deeper, more esoteric role? Mainstream Egyptologists argue that the temple functioned as part of the pharaoh's mortuary complex. Bodies were brought here from the Nile, ritually prepared, then carried through the causeway to the pyramid above. The absence of decoration, they say, might reflect its utilitarian nature or the loss of embellishments over time. Yet for others, the mystery lies deeper in the stone itself. The sheer scale of the megalithic blocks raises engineering questions. How were such immense stones quarried, moved, and fitted so precisely without mortar? Copper tools, primitive sledges, and manpower are the standard explanations. But at this scale, with this precision, doubts remain. The fact that some blocks appear to weigh more than those used in the Great Pyramid itself has led some researchers to speculate that the Valley Temple might predate Khafre by centuries, perhaps even millennia. This idea is bolstered by geological studies. The adjacent Sphinx enclosure, carved from the same limestone bedrock, shows heavy signs of water erosion, suggesting a period of sustained rainfall not seen since well before 2500 BC. If the Sphinx and its surrounding structures, including the Valley Temple, do indeed bear marks of such ancient weathering, then they may belong to a forgotten epoch of Egyptian history, long before the rise of dynastic civilization. Could the Valley Temple be a relic of that earlier time? And if so, what was it originally built for? Some fringe theorists propose that the temple served as a kind of initiatory chamber, a site not of death, but of transformation. Its unadorned walls, its symmetrical halls, and its connection to the Sphinx suggest an architectural language of symbolism rather than function. Perhaps it was designed not to tell a story, but to be a story, an embodiment of sacred geometry, cosmic alignment, or spiritual rebirth. Others see in it echoes of a lost technology, an understanding of stone, resonance, or energy that has since vanished from our historical memory. These interpretations remain speculative, but they persist because the questions remain unanswered. Why build something so precise only to leave it bare? Why invest such effort into a structure that speaks only in silence? Inside the Valley Temple, the light shifts slowly across the polished floors. Footsteps echo between granite pillars. There is a sense that time is stretched here, that this space was designed not just to endure, but to contain something, not necessarily a body, perhaps an idea. And it is this lingering ambiguity that keeps the mystery alive. The Valley Temple of Khafre stands at a crossroads between Orthodox history and something less defined, between the known and the unknowable. Its stones are not broken or fallen, but whole and unmoved, as if waiting not for restoration, but for understanding. So we are left to wonder, was this temple truly Khafre's creation? Or did he inherit it from a deeper, older tradition now buried beneath the sands? In the absence of text or tomb, in the stillness of stone, the Valley Temple holds its secrets close, and for now, we can only listen. Egypt's celestial calendar. From the shadowed halls of the Valley Temple of Khafre, its stones heavy with silence, we shift our gaze upward to the sky. For while Egypt's greatest monuments were built from granite and limestone, its deepest mysteries may have been carved into time itself. Amid the desert winds and celestial rhythms, one question continues to echo through history. How did the ancient Egyptians, so early in human civilization, create a calendar of such elegance, precision, and cosmic alignment? The Egyptian calendar was unlike anything the ancient world had seen. It divided the year into 12 months of 30 days each, with 5 extra days known as the epigomenal days added to balance the cycle. It followed a 365-day solar pattern, remarkably close to our modern Gregorian year. But what's more astonishing is when it appeared. By the early Old Kingdom, more than 4,500 years ago, this calendar was already in use, fully formed, structured, and intricately tied to both agriculture and the cosmos. There is no surviving record of its gradual development, no evidence of a primitive or evolving version. It simply appears as if it had been inherited fully intact. This has puzzled historians and astronomers alike. How did a civilization in 3000 BC possess such advanced understanding of solar movements, sidereal cycles, and seasonal timing? What tools, what observations, what inherited knowledge allowed them to build not only monuments that aligned with the stars, but a calendar that tracked the sun with such reliability? Much of the calendar's structure was tied to one celestial event in particular, the heliacal rising of Sirius, the brightest star in the night sky. Each year, just before dawn, Sirius would reappear on the eastern horizon after a 70-day absence. To the ancient Egyptians, this event was not merely astronomical, it was divine. Its rising marked the beginning of the new year, coinciding with the annual inundation of the Nile, the life-giving flood that replenished Egypt's soil. The star they called Sopdet, and later associated with the goddess Isis, became a cosmic beacon. Its appearance foretold rebirth, renewal, and order. But predicting this moment with precision would have required years, if not centuries, of detailed skywatching. So, who or what taught the Egyptians to read the stars in this way? Mainstream scholars believe that the calendar evolved from centuries of careful observation by priest astronomers, particularly at temple complexes like Heliopolis, known as the City of the Sun. These sacred astronomers, stationed atop pylons and obelisks, may have tracked the shifting horizon line of stars, the length of shadows, and the changes in light that signaled solstices and equinoxes. But even this explanation raises further questions. How could a culture at the dawn of recorded history, without telescopes, without precise instruments, measure the solar year so accurately? How did they coordinate their religious, agricultural, and civic life with a calendar that remained functional for thousands of years? Some suggest the answer lies not in gradual development, but in a legacy left behind. There are theories whispered from the fringes of historical inquiry that propose the calendar was not invented by the Egyptians at all, but inherited perhaps from an earlier, now lost civilization whose understanding of the heavens was passed down through oral tradition, symbolic architecture, or sacred knowledge. Others have proposed that the Egyptians encoded cosmic cycles into their myths, using allegory to preserve astronomical truths. Consider the myth of Osiris and Isis, the 70-day disappearance of Osiris mirroring the 70-day absence of Sirius, or the story of Ra's daily journey through the underworld, echoing the solar path across the sky. These tales are more than morality plays. They are cosmic calendars in symbolic form. And then there's the mysterious link between Egyptian timekeeping and other ancient cultures. The Mayans, thousands of miles away and separated by oceans, also developed an intricate solar calendar with astonishing mathematical precision. The Sumerians, too, tracked celestial cycles with complex systems. Could there have been a shared origin, a forgotten chapter of early sky-watching humanity that seeded this knowledge across the globe? More speculative still are the claims that the Egyptian calendar was designed to align not just with the solar year, but with precessional cycles, those slow 26,000-year shifts in Earth's axial orientation. Some researchers argue that key monuments, including the Sphinx and the Great Pyramid, point to such long-term stellar alignments. If this were true, it would suggest an understanding of time on a scale that modern civilization only confirmed in the past few centuries. Mainstream archaeology remains cautious. The Egyptian civil calendar, for all its elegance, did drift slightly from the true solar year by about a quarter of a day annually. This created a gradual shift in the seasonal timing, corrected only much later through reforms. It's often cited as evidence that their system, while advanced, was not perfect. But perhaps perfection was never the goal. To the Egyptians, time was not linear, but cyclical, an eternal return. The calendar wasn't just a tool for marking days, it was a framework for maintaining Ma'at, the sacred order of the cosmos. By aligning their lives to the rhythms of the heavens, they believed they were upholding the balance between chaos and harmony. And perhaps this is the deeper mystery, not just how they measured time, but how they understood it. Was their calendar a purely observational tool? Or was it a bridge between the mortal world and the divine? A coded language speaking in the movements of stars, in the flooding of rivers, in the birth and death of kings. The desert wind still whispers through the ruins of Heliopolis. The temples are mostly gone, the pillars toppled, the obelisks scattered across continents. But in the silence, the sky remains unchanged, eternal, watching. And as we trace the paths of stars once mapped in ink and stone, we are left to ask, did the ancient Egyptians create their calendar by looking outward or by remembering something long forgotten? Perhaps time itself holds the answer. The Great Sphinx of Giza. As we leave behind the stars and shadows of Egypt's celestial calendar, our path leads back to Earth, though not to the ordinary terrain of sand and stone. Instead, it brings us face to face with one of the most iconic and enigmatic monuments in all of human history, a figure carved from living rock, crouched at the edge of the Giza Plateau, staring silently eastward as the sun rises and sets year after year. The Great Sphinx of Giza, it is a sculpture of contradictions, part lion, part man, impossibly massive and yet delicately weathered. Measuring over 240 feet long and 66 feet high, it is among the largest monolithic statues in the world. But despite its scale and fame, one central question has never been conclusively answered. Whose face does the Sphinx wear? At first glance, the mainstream answer appears straightforward. The Sphinx is thought to represent Pharaoh Kafra, the same king credited with building the second pyramid at Giza around 2500 BC. This attribution is based largely on proximity. The Sphinx sits beside Kafra's Valley Temple and Causeway, and on a statue of Kafra found nearby which shares some similar facial features. For decades, this identification has been taught as settled fact. And yet, when we look closer, the certainty begins to crumble. For one, the Sphinx bears no inscriptions naming Kafra, no cartouche, no dedicatory text, nothing etched in stone to say, "This is me." In a civilization that left its legacy carved on every wall, every pillar, every tomb, this absence is striking. Then there's the matter of the face itself. Weathered by wind, sand, and time, the Sphinx's face has suffered substantial erosion. Its nose is famously missing, its beard mostly vanished. Yet what remains still tells a story. Some scholars and forensic experts have argued that the facial features do not align with known statues of Kafra. The proportions differ. The Sphinx's face is broader, flatter, perhaps older. In fact, a few researchers suggest that the facial structure may not even reflect the typical physiognomy of 4th Dynasty pharaohs at all. This has opened the door to alternative theories, each one reaching deeper into Egypt's hidden past. One suggestion is that the Sphinx predates Kafra entirely. The idea popularized by geologist Dr. Robert Schoch and others stems from the weathering patterns found on the Sphinx's body and enclosure. Unlike other monuments on the Giza Plateau, which show wind erosion, the Sphinx bears signs of heavy water erosion, smooth undulating grooves that suggest long exposure to rainfall. But Egypt hasn't seen substantial rainfall since the end of the last ice age, over 7,000 years ago. If the Sphinx was indeed shaped by rain, then it may have been carved not in 2500 BC, but many centuries earlier, perhaps as early as 7,000 or even 9,000 BC. If that's true, then Kafra could not have commissioned it. He may have merely inherited the monument, restoring or reworking it for his own purposes. And the original face? It may have been something or someone entirely different. Some believe the original head was that of a lion, matching the body and fitting with astronomical theories that place the Sphinx as a marker for the constellation Leo during a period of celestial alignment around 10,500 BC. If the head was later recarved into a human face, that might explain its disproportionate size in relation to the body, a head far too small for such a massive form. Others propose that the face may represent an even earlier ruler, long lost to history, perhaps a forgotten king of a pre-dynastic culture, perhaps even someone whose name we will never know. Then there is the most provocative idea of all, that the Sphinx may serve not just as a monument, but as a message, a vessel of encoded knowledge from an earlier civilization, one that understood the stars, the cycles of time, and the power of myth. In this view, the face is symbolic, not personal. It represents not a man, but a concept, divine kingship, eternal watchfulness, the boundary between this world and the next. And still, the Sphinx refuses to speak. Decades of excavation have yielded fragments, pieces of the beard, shards of the headdress, but no definitive answers. The dream stele erected between the Sphinx's paws by Thutmose IV tells of a prince who saw the statue in a dream and cleared it from the sands. But even this account, centuries after Kafra, refers to the Sphinx as an ancient being, already buried and forgotten. So we are left with a face whose gaze spans time itself, a face that may be Khafre's or someone else's, or no one's at all. Beneath the weathered contours and missing nose lies a riddle as vast as the desert around it. Was the Sphinx carved in a single age or reworked across millennia? Was it a monument of kings or of gods? And most haunting of all, what knowledge has it watched slip away with the sands? As the sun rises behind the Sphinx and casts its first light across the plateau, it catches the edges of this ancient face, silent, eroded, unresolved. And so the question remains, who or what is the great Sphinx truly meant to represent? Perhaps the answer lies not in stone, but in what was never written. The lost pyramid of Jedas at Abu Rawash. As we turn away from the gaze of the great Sphinx, its identity eroded by time, its meaning forever open to interpretation, we journey north along the edge of the western desert to a place few tourists visit. Beyond the familiar monuments of Giza, past the polished limestone blocks of Kafra and the towering grandeur of Khufu's Great Pyramid, lies a windswept plateau shrouded in dust and silence. Here, amid the crumbled remains of once great structures, sits a lesser-known site that raises more questions than it answers: the ruins of the lost pyramid of Jedas. The site is called Abu Rawash. To the untrained eye, there is little to see, just scattered blocks, half-buried shafts, and a rise of rock that appears more like a quarry than a royal tomb. And yet, this was once the chosen burial site of a pharaoh. Jedas, the son of Khufu, reigned for a brief and poorly documented period during Egypt's 4th dynasty, around 2560 BC. He was the immediate successor to the builder of the Great Pyramid, and yet instead of continuing the family legacy at Giza, he made a striking choice to build his pyramid elsewhere. Why? Abu Rawash sits roughly 8 kilometers north of Giza, on higher ground, with a commanding view of the Nile Valley. It is a place of isolation and exposure, more difficult to access and far more difficult to build upon. The limestone bedrock is uneven, the terrain harsh, and yet Jedas selected this windswept plateau for what would have been one of the most ambitious projects of his time, a pyramid that, according to some scholars, may have rivaled the Great Pyramid in scale and height. But the pyramid was never completed, or if it was, it didn't survive. What remains today is a complex puzzle, fragmented foundations, abandoned granite casing blocks, and deep-cut shafts filled with rubble and time. The structure itself appears violently dismantled. For centuries, it was assumed that Jedas' pyramid was simply unfinished, abandoned due to the king's short reign or logistical setbacks. But recent excavations have revealed signs that the pyramid was completed only to be deliberately destroyed, stone by stone. But by whom and why? Some believe the damage was caused in antiquity, perhaps by successors who sought to erase Jedas' memory. Others argue the destruction came much later during the Roman period, when pyramid blocks were scavenged for local construction. Yet the scale of the damage, its thoroughness, its apparent focus, has led some researchers to suspect something more purposeful. Was this an act of political vengeance, a dynastic cleansing, or was Jedas' pyramid targeted for reasons we no longer understand? Jedas himself is a figure shrouded in contradiction. Unlike his father Khufu, who was aligned with the solar cult of Ra but still bore the traditional Horus names, Jedas took a step further, declaring himself son of Ra, the first pharaoh to formally link his kingship to the sun god in his royal title. Some historians interpret this as the beginning of a religious shift, one that would eventually culminate generations later in the radical monotheism of Akhenaten. Was Jedas attempting to redefine kingship? Was his decision to leave Giza a symbolic break from tradition, an assertion of a new divine identity? If so, it may have created enemies among those who viewed the royal necropolis as sacred, untouchable ground. The physical remnants of his pyramid offer further intrigue. Granite blocks, massive and finely dressed, were found strewn across the site, some bearing signs of advanced cutting techniques. The quality of the masonry rivals that of Giza. Fragments of statuary, including parts of a striking red quartzite sphinx, suggest a degree of artistic refinement unexpected for a pharaoh with such a brief reign. A decapitated head of Jedas himself, carved from the same rare quartzite, was discovered nearby, its features deliberate, almost serene, and its destruction unmistakable. If this was an unfinished project, why the statues? Why the detailed architectural layout? And if the pyramid was completed, why was it erased? Even Jedas' body has never been found. His sarcophagus is missing, his burial chamber ruined. Unlike his father and brother who left behind elaborate funerary complexes, Jedas' afterlife appears to have been interrupted, his legacy fragmented and cast into the dust. And yet there are still whispers of hidden chambers yet to be excavated, of a funerary boat pit not unlike those found at Giza, of alignment anomalies that suggest deeper astronomical or ritual meanings behind the placement of Abu Rawash. Some speculate that Jedas' pyramid held a secret, something that led to its destruction. Others see the site as the unfortunate victim of historical erasure, caught in the tides of royal succession and shifting religious power. Today, Abu Rawash is quiet. The wind moves freely over the broken stones. There are no crowds, no grand restoration projects, just the scattered ruins of a monument that once aimed for the sky and now lies buried under centuries of speculation. And so the mystery remains. Why did Jedas break from the sacred alignment of Giza? What happened to his pyramid after it was built? And what might still lie beneath the sand, waiting to be uncovered? In the shadows of Egypt's most famous kings, the story of Jedas whispers a different kind of legacy, one not of triumph and immortality, but of silence, absence, and loss. And perhaps, just perhaps, a secret buried deeper than we yet know. The Osiris, a subterranean mystery deepened. Beyond the windswept ruins of Abu Rawash, where the mystery of Jedas' vanished legacy fades into the dust, the journey returns once again to Abbidos, the sacred heart of ancient Egypt's spiritual world, a place not merely of temples and tombs, but of pilgrimage, myth, and rebirth. And beneath its sun-baked sands lies a hidden chamber that few ever see. Not a tomb, not a sanctuary, but something stranger, something deeper, a vast subterranean structure whose purpose remains as elusive as the darkness that surrounds it. It is known simply as the Osiris. Discovered in the early 20th century behind the grand mortuary temple of Seti I, the Osiris lies sunken deep into the ground, its massive stone blocks submerged in groundwater, its chambers echoing with silence. At first glance, it appears out of place. Unlike the elegant, delicately carved reliefs of Seti's temple above, the Osiris is built of cyclopean masonry, megalithic stones weighing up to 60 tons, fitted with such precision that no mortar was needed. Smooth granite pillars rise from a central island, encircled by a trench that now holds water, giving the appearance of a flooded ceremonial pool. Staircases descend into the gloom. Corridors lead nowhere. The air is damp, still, and heavy with age. Mainstream Egyptologists generally accept that the Osiris was built during the reign of Seti I in the 13th century BC, perhaps as a symbolic tomb for the god Osiris, meant to represent the underworld. Its placement directly behind Seti's temple supports this interpretation. Inscriptions on the upper walls and fragments of painted reliefs suggest some degree of dynastic connection, and yet the structure beneath seems older, much older. Nothing about the Osirian's architecture matches the stylistic norms of the New Kingdom. In fact, it bears a striking resemblance to megalithic sites found not just elsewhere in Egypt, but across the ancient world. Its sheer scale, minimalist design, and subterranean layout evoke comparisons to temples in pre-Incan Peru, or the foundational levels of sites in Baalbek, Lebanon. Why would Seti, whose own temple is a masterpiece of fine stonework and detailed art, suddenly adopt an entirely different architectural language for the Osirian? Some scholars argue that Seti did not build the Osirian at all. Instead, they suggest he discovered it, already ancient by his time, and chose to incorporate it into the sacred landscape of Abbidos. The temple above would serve the living, the structure below, the dead. If that's true, then who built the Osirian, and when? Geological studies of the erosion on the lower walls, particularly those long exposed to groundwater, suggest significant age. There are no definitive inscriptions attributing its construction, no royal names carved in the typical cartouche. It is as if the builders left no trace of themselves, only the stone itself, perfectly shaped and deeply buried. Some propose that the Osirian is a remnant of a lost chapter in Egyptian history, perhaps pre-dynastic, perhaps even pre-cataclysmic, dating to an era before 3000 BC. The symbolism of water, the island platform, and the surrounding enclosure has led some to interpret it not merely as a tomb, but as a symbolic map of the cosmos, an architectural representation of the primeval mound rising from the waters of chaos in Egyptian creation mythology. Could it have been a place of initiation, a gateway between realms, a site not for burial but for transformation? Others more cautiously point out that the similarities to Seti's temple may indicate it was built under his reign, but by a different team of architects experimenting with older, archaic forms. The lack of inscriptions, they argue, could be intentional, designed to evoke mystery, to mirror the unknowable nature of the god Osiris himself, ruler of the underworld and judge of the dead. And still, the deeper one looks, the more the questions multiply. Why was such a structure buried beneath ground level in a region prone to flooding? Why use granite, so difficult to quarry and transport, for a structure with no clear function? Why the deliberate absence of narrative inscriptions, so typical of Egyptian sacred architecture? In the 1990s, ground-penetrating radar surveys hinted at the possibility of further chambers beneath the Osirian, sealed corridors, undiscovered rooms. But the groundwater rising year by year makes deeper exploration difficult. What lies beneath remains hidden, submerged, inaccessible. The myths of Osiris say he was murdered by his brother, dismembered, scattered across Egypt, and reassembled by the goddess Isis. In this mythic geography, Abbidos was his burial site, his most sacred resting place. Pilgrims traveled from across the Nile Valley to stand in his presence. Could the Osirian have once housed a sacred relic, a symbolic coffin, a ritual meant to mimic his death and resurrection? Or is its true purpose something more ancient still? Something that predates the gods, the myths, and even the pharaohs themselves. Today, the Osirian sits in shadow, half submerged, half forgotten. Few visitors make their way to its flooded heart. The air is cool and damp. The stones are still, and the silence is not empty. It feels watchful, as though the structure remembers something we have forgotten. So we ask, was the Osirian a symbolic tomb, a remnant of an earlier civilization, a portal between myth and memory? The answers, like the water that laps at its hidden walls, remain just out of reach. The enigma of elongated skulls. From the submerged stillness of the Osirian, its silent granite monoliths cloaked in shadow, we move into another layer of Egypt's forgotten past, a different kind of mystery, not carved into stone or encoded in myth, but found in the human remains themselves. Deep within burial chambers across ancient Egypt, archaeologists have uncovered something both subtle and unsettling. Human skulls elongated far beyond normal proportions, smooth, tapered, and unnaturally stretched. Bones that seem to defy typical human anatomy. What are we looking at? And why does their presence echo across different regions, different time periods, and even different continents? The phenomenon is known as cranial elongation, or artificial cranial deformation, It's a practice that has been observed not only in Egypt, but in cultures as diverse as the Paracas of Peru, the Huns of Central Asia, and certain tribes in Africa and the South Pacific. In Egypt, the most notable examples have surfaced in pre-dynastic tombs and burials dated as far back as 4000 BC, long before the age of the pyramids. The skulls are unmistakable, elongated at the rear. They curve smoothly upward and back, forming an elegant, almost alien silhouette. They are not the result of genetic mutation or disease. Instead, they appear to have been deliberately shaped, manipulated during infancy by binding the head with cloth or wooden boards, over time encouraging the bones to grow in a new, constrained form. But the deeper mystery isn't just how they were shaped, it's why. Why would ancient people intentionally alter the natural shape of the human head? What purpose, social, spiritual, or symbolic, could have driven such a profound transformation? Mainstream scholars offer practical explanations. In many cultures, elongated skulls were seen as a sign of beauty, nobility, or divine status. The act of shaping the head may have served as a marker of identity, signaling membership in an elite class or priestly caste. In this view, cranial modification is a kind of social passport, a physical signature of belonging. In Egypt, however, the evidence is more fragmentary and more intriguing. Most of the elongated skulls found in Egyptian contexts do not appear in royal tombs or elite necropolises. Instead, they're often discovered in simpler pre-dynastic graves, long before centralized kingship took hold. And yet the appearance of these skulls seems to anticipate a recurring theme in Egyptian art and ideology. The idea that the pharaoh is not quite human, but something more, something halfway between man and God. Look closely at the art of the Amarna period, and the parallels become harder to ignore. During the reign of Akhenaten in the 14th century BC, depictions of the royal family shift dramatically. Akhenaten himself is shown with a narrow face, long limbs, and a distinctively elongated skull. His daughters too appear with exaggerated cranial shapes, smooth, extended, almost stylized. Scholars often interpret these forms as artistic abstraction or religious symbolism. Akhenaten's theological revolution centered on the worship of the sun disk, a significant departure from tradition. Perhaps the imagery was meant to set the royal family apart, to signify divine transformation. But what if it wasn't just symbolism? Some researchers have suggested that Akhenaten's appearance and that of his family reflects an echo of an ancient practice, remembered and revived in a new spiritual form, a nod to an older, long-forgotten belief that to stretch the head was to expand the mind, to bring the individual closer to the gods, or to something that came before the gods. And here the theories become more speculative. Some fringe researchers propose that the elongated skulls in Egypt and in cultures around the world hint at contact with an unknown civilization, one not native to Earth. The idea, controversial and widely dismissed by academia, suggests that the deliberate reshaping of skulls was an attempt to emulate these mysterious beings, to look more like them, whatever they were. Others suggest the practice was rooted not in contact, but in memory, a dim cultural echo of an ancient time when elongated skulls were natural, not artificial, a time now buried beneath layers of myth and sand. Yet even without invoking lost civilizations or extraterrestrial influences, the skulls remain deeply puzzling. Why did so many ancient peoples separated by oceans and continents engage in such a specific and extreme form of body modification? Was it a coincidence of cultural expression, a universal human urge to reach beyond the physical? Or does it speak to something deeper, an instinctual connection between the shape of the head and the perception of wisdom, power, or transcendence? And in Egypt specifically, why do we find elongated skulls at the very dawn of its civilization, only to see them vanish as dynastic power consolidates? What changed? Was the practice suppressed, ritualized, or absorbed into other forms of cultural expression? Today, most of the skulls rest in museum storage, cataloged, measured, but largely forgotten. Few visitors ever see them. Few exhibits ever mention them. They do not fit neatly into the linear narrative of pharaohs and pyramids, but they remain silent skeletal anomalies that raise questions the written texts do not answer. Perhaps the mystery of these skulls lies not in science or myth alone, but in the tension between the two, a practice born of belief or memory, a transformation of the human body in pursuit of something beyond. So we ask, were the elongated skulls of ancient Egypt a mark of devotion, of identity, of forgotten heritage? Or are they the last physical trace of a story we've only just begun to remember? The end of Pharaoh Merneptah's lineage. From the unsettling silence of elongated skulls buried in the sands of Egypt's deep past, our journey now moves toward the waning light of a once mighty empire, toward a moment not of birth or innovation, but of something quietly vanishing. A name fades from inscriptions, a bloodline ends without clarity, and the golden thread of royal succession begins to unravel. This is the mystery of the end of Pharaoh Merneptah's lineage, a quiet disappearance that still defies simple explanation. Merneptah was the 13th son of Ramesses II, one of Egypt's most celebrated pharaohs. He ascended the throne late in life after outliving his many royal brothers and reigned during a time of growing instability. The 13th century BC was no longer the Egypt of boundless construction and military conquest. It was an age marked by droughts, foreign threats, and slow internal decline. Yet Merneptah held the throne for nearly a decade, maintaining order and legacy in the twilight of Egypt's imperial might. His tomb in the Valley of the Kings, KV8, is imposing but incomplete. Its corridors stretch deep into the earth, the walls carved with traditional texts. Yet many of the chambers were never finished. His sarcophagus, a grand multi-layered structure, now lies broken, its pieces scattered in modern museums. And although his mummy was eventually discovered, reburied in a royal cache at Deir el-Bahari, the story it tells is strangely silent. Most pharaohs, even those who ruled for brief periods, were followed by sons or relatives who continued their legacy. But after Merneptah's death, the record becomes murky. His direct line, if it continued at all, seems to have vanished. Who succeeded him is still a matter of debate. Some sources name Seti II, believed by many to be his son. Others suggest that Seti II may have been a distant relative or even an opportunistic usurper. The line of succession becomes contested, the political scene unstable, and Egypt enters a period of internal rivalry and dynastic fragmentation. Why? What happened in the final years of Merneptah's reign that led to such uncertainty? Was there a crisis of legitimacy, an assassination, a plague, or did something more complex unfold behind the scenes of official record-keeping? One curious element is a figure named Amenmesse, a shadowy pharaoh who appears suddenly in the historical record, overlapping chronologically with Seti II. Some scholars believe he may have been a rival claimant to the throne, perhaps a son of Merneptah from a different queen. Others argue that he was an unrelated noble who seized power during a moment of weakness. His monuments are few and often later defaced. His tomb KV10 was started but never finished. His mummy has never been found. It is possible that Amenmesse's rise and the quick erasure of his name reflects a hidden power struggle within Merneptah's own household. If so, then the end of Merneptah's lineage may have been less a matter of fate and more the result of palace intrigue. Royal families in Egypt were often fractured by rival queens, half-brothers, and complex lines of inheritance. Could one such rivalry have turned fatal? Another possibility lies beyond the palace walls. Merneptah's reign was marked by significant external threats. His famous Victory Stele, now housed in the Cairo Museum, records a military campaign in Canaan and contains the first known written mention of a people called Israel. But the greater threat may have come from the west, the mysterious Libyan tribes and their allies, known to have invaded during his reign. Egypt repelled these attacks, but not without cost. Was the royal house weakened in the process? Moreover, Merneptah ruled during a time of growing famine and social unrest. Climate studies suggest that prolonged drought may have affected Egypt during this era, reducing the Nile floods and threatening agricultural output. Famines destabilize empires. They spark rebellions. They erode the authority of kings, especially aging ones. Some researchers wonder whether Merneptah's heirs, if he had them, may have perished in the chaos that followed. Others consider the possibility that his family line was politically erased by later dynasties, either through military defeat or deliberate historical revisionism. And here the silence of the tombs becomes more telling than their inscriptions. No intact funerary monuments have been definitively linked to Merneptah's sons. No grand statues or commemorative texts honor his descendants. Even Seti II's lineage ends abruptly, giving way to yet another usurper, Siptah, whose own parentage remains unclear. Within a generation of Merneptah's death, the 19th dynasty itself collapsed, and the throne was seized by the military general Rameses III, inaugurating the 20th dynasty in what many believe was a forceful break from the past. Was Merneptah's line quietly extinguished, or was it violently erased? In Egyptian tradition, to be forgotten was worse than death. The erasure of a name, the desecration of a tomb, the breaking of a lineage. These were not just political acts, but metaphysical ones. They severed the connection between the living and the afterlife. They denied the soul its place among the stars. And perhaps this is the greatest mystery of all, not just how a dynasty ended, but why it was allowed to vanish without memorial. No grand texts mourn Merneptah's legacy, no clear heirs claim his mantle, just silence chiseled into the stone corridors of unfinished tombs and half-erased cartouches. So we ask, what really happened to Merneptah's descendants? Were they victims of succession, of conspiracy, or of something darker still? The answers remain buried, perhaps beneath the dust of the Valley of the Kings, or within a yet unopened tomb, waiting quietly for the light of discovery. Pre-dynastic mummification. As the royal bloodlines of Merneptah quietly dissolve into the shadows of forgotten history, we now turn our attention further back, far beyond the dynasties, before the pharaohs, before the hieroglyphs were etched into stone. We descend into the sands of time to an era where Egypt had no pyramids, no temples, no kings. And yet, even in this prehistoric silence, something remarkable emerges. Carefully preserved human remains, wrapped not in grandeur, but in mystery. We are in the Nile Valley near the edge of the desert, where the dunes begin to rise, where burial pits from over 6,000 years ago have yielded some of the oldest mummified bodies ever discovered in Egypt. These are not the gilded, resin-coated mummies of the New Kingdom. There are no elaborate coffins, no sacred inscriptions, only bodies laid in shallow graves, curled in fetal positions, wrapped in linen, and astonishingly well-preserved. They predate the dynastic era by centuries, some by more than a millennium. And yet the preservation of skin, hair, and even internal organs rivals that of later royal mummies. How is this possible? For decades, archaeologists assumed these early mummies were preserved by nature alone. The arid desert sands, with their low humidity and intense heat, created the perfect environment for desiccation. Bodies buried in direct contact with the earth would dry rapidly, inhibiting decay. It was believed to be accidental, a fortunate coincidence of geography. But recent discoveries suggest something more intentional. In 2014, a team of researchers analyzing linen wrappings from pre-dynastic cemeteries at sites like Badari and Mostageta made a startling discovery. The linen bore traces of a complex mixture, plant oils, resins, gum, and an antibacterial agent derived from conifer trees. The chemical composition closely resembled that found in much later mummification practices, some 2,500 years after these individuals were buried. This was not a natural accident. This was chemistry. This was a ritual. Could it be that mummification, one of Egypt's most iconic and sophisticated traditions, began not in the time of the pyramids, but in the Neolithic age? And if so, who were the people who practiced it? The graves themselves offer few clues. There are no grand monuments, only simple pottery, carved figurines, and flint tools buried alongside the dead. These were farming communities, likely governed by clan elders, living in an age when writing had not yet emerged. And yet they treated their dead with care, selecting specific materials, wrapping the bodies with purpose, and applying a resinous mixture that seems far too advanced for its time. Where did this knowledge come from? Mainstream archaeologists propose that early Egyptian communities developed mummification through gradual experimentation, perhaps beginning with the realization that certain burial conditions preserve bodies better than others. Over time, these observations were ritualized, passed from one generation to the next, evolving into the complex embalming procedures of the Old and Middle Kingdoms. But the sophistication of the pre-dynastic resin mixtures complicates this theory. Some of the ingredients used, such as imported conifer resin, would not have been readily available in the Nile Valley. They suggest trade routes or resource networks far older than previously assumed. Did these early Egyptians travel great distances or exchange knowledge with other distant cultures to obtain these substances? There are whispers of older connections between early Egypt and the ancient peoples of the Levant, Mesopotamia, even the Nubian desert to the south. Could fragments of an even earlier tradition have made their way into the Nile Valley long before the pharaohs rose to power? Others wonder if this knowledge was not imported, but inherited. In a time before writing, how was such information passed down? Through oral tradition? Through ritual? Could this practice be a surviving remnant of a much earlier worldview, one that saw death not as an end, but as a transformation requiring preparation, preservation, and care? More speculative still are the theories that suggest pre-dynastic mummification was part of a lost spiritual system, an esoteric tradition deeply attuned to the cycles of life, death, and rebirth. These early burials often place the dead in a fetal position, facing west, the direction of the setting sun. The symbolism is subtle but powerful. It speaks of a belief in the afterlife long before Osiris or Ra were named. Were these people anticipating something greater, laying the spiritual and ritual groundwork for the grand civilization that would follow? Or were they preserving someone, because they believed the body still held power beyond death? To this day, pre-dynastic mummies remain rare. Most were destroyed by time, erosion, or looting. Those that survive are fragile, difficult to date, and often lacking context. And yet, they remain silent testaments to a mystery buried deeper than dynastic memory, a mystery that suggests that Egypt's mastery of death may not have begun in gilded tombs, but in quiet sands under starlit skies thousands of years before the first pyramid rose. So we ask, were these early mummifiers merely experimenting or reviving something older, something passed down from a forgotten chapter of human history? And if this knowledge existed before kings and kingdoms, then what else might have once lived in the silence before Egypt's recorded story begins? The mastaba fields of Saqqara. From the fragile linen wrappings of pre-dynastic graves, where silent hands first practiced the art of mummification, we now emerge onto a windswept plateau that once echoed with the sounds of chisels and sacred chants. Here, on the edge of the desert south of modern-day Cairo, lies one of the most ancient and layered burial grounds in all of Egypt, a place where time seems to fold in on itself, and where every stone whispers a different story. This is Saqqara, and at its heart, the mysterious expanse known as the Mastaba Fields. Spread across the necropolis like low stone islands jutting from a sea of sand, the mastabas, flat-roofed rectangular tombs with sloping sides, dot the landscape in quiet rows. At first glance, they may seem simple, modest compared to the pyramids, unassuming beside the towering step pyramid of Djoser that dominates the horizon. But within these structures lies a profound enigma, one that predates the grandeur of kings and perhaps even helped lay the foundation for Egypt's monumental age. The mastabas of Saqqara represent some of the oldest stone funerary architecture in the world. Their earliest forms date to the 1st and 2nd dynasties, more than 5,000 years ago, around 3000 BC. Many belong not to pharaohs, but to high officials, priests, and members of the elite who served the state during its formative years. Their walls are carved with intricate scenes, hunting in the marshes, preparing offerings, lists of sacred goods for the afterlife. These were not just graves, they were portals, ritual spaces meant to sustain the soul across eternity. But what makes these mastaba fields truly mysterious is not just their age or artistry, it's the sense that we still don't fully understand their original purpose. Why did the Egyptians begin with this architectural form? Why this shape, this orientation, this uniformity? And what compelled them not long afterward to transition so dramatically from mastabas to pyramids? The evolution appears sudden, as if something changed, some revelation, some shift in belief or royal ambition. Djoser's step pyramid, the first large-scale stone structure in Egypt, and widely considered the first pyramid, was essentially a stack of enlarged mastabas, one atop the other. It rose from the same earth just meters from earlier mastaba fields. Was it simply innovation, or was it a reinterpretation of something older, deeper? Some scholars propose that the mastaba form was a symbolic representation of the primordial mound, the shape believed to have risen from the waters of chaos at the beginning of time. According to Egyptian cosmology, its sloping sides mimic the sacred geometry of emergence and rebirth. Others believe the mastabas were designed to mimic early mud brick houses or even shrines, making them eternal homes for the deceased. But then come the anomalies. In the northern area of the Saqqara necropolis, some mastabas, like the imposing tomb of Mereruka or that of the official Hesi-Ra, show internal features that seem too advanced for their time. Corridors with unexpected precision, stonework that rivals later pyramid craftsmanship. Some walls are decorated with unusual symbolic arrangements, patterns, and geometric shapes not fully explained by funerary ritual. And in a few mastabas, there are shafts that descend deep into the bedrock, narrow vertical tunnels whose function is still debated. Were they symbolic pathways to the underworld, hidden storage for grave goods? Or could they point to something more complex, more deliberately concealed? The presence of labyrinthine chambers beneath some mastabas, filled with false doors, blind corridors, and sealed niches, has led to speculation that these structures served as more than burial sites. Perhaps they functioned as spiritual initiation centers, places where the elite underwent rites of passage meant to mirror the journey of the soul after death. Or perhaps they were hiding something. Some fringe theorists have suggested that Saqqara, with its dense layering of tombs, temples, and subterranean passages, was part of a much older sacred site, its origins predating even the first dynasty. The uniform orientation of the mastabas, their alignment with celestial or cardinal directions, and the repetition of certain architectural ratios have all been interpreted by some as signs of inherited knowledge, echoes of an earlier, now lost system of sacred science. But mainstream archaeology urges caution. There is no definitive evidence that the mastabas themselves predate Egypt's early dynasties. Most inscriptions found within them tie directly to known officials and historical periods. And yet the deeper one looks into Saqqara, the more elusive its story becomes. For instance, beneath the surface of the necropolis lie vast underground galleries, catacombs, and tunnels, some stretching for hundreds of meters. While many of these are attributed to later periods, particularly the late and Ptolemaic eras, their sheer scale suggests that Saqqara remained a site of intense religious significance long after Egypt's political capital shifted away. Why did this place hold such enduring spiritual weight? And why do so many of the mastabas appear clustered around invisible lines, suggesting a plan or a blueprint that modern researchers have yet to fully decode? Today, the mastaba fields of Saqqara remain in quiet desolation. The limestone blocks are worn by centuries of wind and sun. Footprints of ancient builders have long faded. But as archaeologists slowly excavate new layers of the site, new questions emerge from the dust. Were the mastabas simply graves for a rising class of elites? Or were they part of a more complex system, ritual, astronomical, or perhaps something yet to be uncovered? In the silence of Saqqara, we are left with the feeling that much still lies beneath the surface, hidden, waiting. What else might the mastaba fields reveal if we knew how to listen? The lost obelisks of Heliopolis. From the sunlit mastaba fields of Saqqara, where stone and silence preserve the earliest echoes of Egypt's sacred dead, we now drift northeast toward a place that once stood at the spiritual heart of the ancient world, a city lost within the sprawl of modern Cairo, its temples broken, its avenues erased, and yet its name still hums with power. Heliopolis, the city of the sun. Here in what was once a flourishing center of wisdom and worship, the greatest minds of ancient Egypt studied the stars, observed the turning of seasons, and composed the earliest myths of creation. This was the birthplace of the Ennead, the 9 gods who governed the cosmos, the sacred center from which the sun itself was believed to rise. And towering over its vast temple complex once stood monuments unlike any others, the obelisks of Heliopolis. Today only one remains, a single granite shaft known as the Obelisk of Senusret, which stands isolated in a dusty plaza surrounded by traffic and time. It is the oldest surviving obelisk, still in its original position, carved nearly 4,000 years ago during the 12th dynasty. Rising over 60 feet into the air, its sides are inscribed with hieroglyphs praising the king and the solar gods. But this lone sentinel is just a shadow of what once was. Historical records, inscriptions, and accounts from later periods suggest that Heliopolis once held dozens of obelisks, slender monoliths of red granite quarried from Aswan, polished to gleam in the sunlight and raised to honor the sun god Ra. They lined temple courts, flanked sacred processional ways, and marked cosmological alignments with mathematical precision. They were not just decorative, they were instruments of time, stone needles linking earth to sky. So where did they go? The mystery of Heliopolis is not merely one of ruins, but of absence. Unlike Karnak or Luxor, where remnants of temples still stretch into the sky, Heliopolis has all but vanished. The massive stone walls, the sanctuary of Ra, the libraries, the sacred pools, all gone, and the obelisks that once stood in such abundance, scattered across the world. Some were taken in antiquity. During the Roman period, emperors transported obelisks to adorn their new capital. One now stands in the center of the Vatican. Another marks the Place de la Concorde in Paris. Others reside in London, Istanbul, and New York. But even accounting for these known monuments, the tally doesn't match. The math leaves gaps. Several obelisks from Heliopolis are simply missing, unrecorded, undocumented, lost. Were they broken down and repurposed during later construction booms, destroyed in ancient conflicts or natural disasters? Or were they deliberately buried, hidden from view, concealed beneath modern neighborhoods or layers of Nile silt? There is evidence to support all possibilities. Satellite imaging and ground-penetrating radar have revealed large stone anomalies beneath the surface of the area known today as Ain Shams, where ancient Heliopolis once stood. These subterranean features may be foundations, walls, or even fallen monoliths, but decades of urban expansion have made excavation nearly impossible. Apartment buildings, roads, and factories now sit atop this ancient landscape. Whatever secrets lie below remain locked in place, but even as the physical trail grows cold, the symbolic mystery deepens. Why were so many obelisks moved from Heliopolis in the first place? And why did successive rulers from the Romans to the French feel compelled to possess them? Perhaps it was more than just admiration for Egyptian artistry. The obelisk was more than a monument. In Egyptian belief, it was the Benben, a symbol of the first land to emerge from the primeval waters of chaos. It represented creation, stability, and the enduring power of the sun. To place an obelisk in one city was to import a fragment of divine order, a cosmic anchor. But if that's true, what was the cost of removing them from their original sacred context? Did the dispersion of Heliopolis's obelisks reflect the slow disintegration of Egypt's spiritual core? Or were the stones removed during times of collapse, taken not to preserve their power, but to prevent it from falling into the wrong hands? Some researchers speculate that beneath Heliopolis's missing temple lie other monoliths, ones that were never meant to be moved, hidden shafts, sealed chambers, elements of a solar cult whose deepest rituals were kept from public knowledge. Others wonder if Heliopolis was more than a religious capital. Could it have been an ancient observatory, a center of archaeo-astronomical learning now erased by time? We may never know. Today, the obelisk of Senusret stands alone, unprotected, uncelebrated, surrounded by concrete and noise. Its inscriptions still gleam faintly in the sunlight, calling out across millennia. But they are not answered. And so the question remains, what happened to the lost obelisks of Heliopolis? Were they victims of conquest, of erosion, of forgetting? Or do they still lie beneath the earth, waiting to be revealed once more? As the sun sets over Cairo's eastern horizon, it casts a golden light across the broken stones of the forgotten city. The air grows still, and for a moment, it's possible to imagine the forest of obelisks rising again, each one a silent hymn to a civilization that reached for the sky. What else lies buried beneath the city of the sun? The solar temple of Sahur at Abusir. As the scattered obelisks of Heliopolis vanish into foreign skylines and layers of forgotten stone, The trail of Egypt's solar devotion leads us further still into the quiet sands west of modern-day Cairo, where another sacred structure once shimmered under the sun's gaze. Today, little remains above the surface. Only low mounds and broken masonry hint at what once stood. But beneath the dust lies a site that once held immense cosmic significance, the solar temple of Pharaoh Sahur. Tucked near the edge of Abusir, between the more famous necropolises of Saqqara and Giza, Sahur's Sun Temple was one of the earliest monumental expressions of a divine relationship that defined much of Egypt's ancient worldview. The pharaoh's bond with Ra, the god of the sun. Built during the 5th dynasty, around 2480 BC, the temple was known to the ancients as Sekhet Ra, meaning Field of Ra. It was part of a broader trend among 5th dynasty kings, several of whom commissioned solar temples as distinct from their pyramid complexes. But Sahur's temple, now heavily eroded and buried, was likely among the most elaborate, a walled sanctuary with altars, open courtyards, and a central obelisk or sun pillar that once rose skyward from the heart of the structure. It was not a tomb, it was a celebration of light, of divine energy, and of eternal renewal. But why here? Why in this specific patch of desert, away from the traditional burial grounds of the elite? And why did the practice of building solar temples vanish almost as suddenly as it emerged? Mainstream Egyptology suggests that the solar temples of the 5th dynasty reflect a theological shift. These kings, unlike their predecessors, emphasized a more direct connection with Ra. The emergence of the sun temples coincides with the growing power of the priesthood of Heliopolis and possibly a political alliance with its rising religious elites. The temples would have served as ceremonial centers for public and royal rituals, offerings to the sun, reaffirmations of cosmic order, and demonstrations of the king's divine authority. But when archaeologists unearthed what little remains of Sahur's solar temple, they found more questions than answers. The structure was heavily damaged, some say deliberately dismantled. Foundations that once supported massive stone walls now lie shattered. The central obelisk, if it ever existed in full, has not survived. Decorative elements, if they were ever inscribed, have faded or vanished. What can be seen today are sun-baked blocks, a few fragments of pillars, and the faint outlines of walls that once formed an enclosure filled with symbolic power. Was it simply a victim of time, or was something else at work? Unlike pyramids, which were buried and sealed, the solar temples were exposed, open to the sky by design. This made them more vulnerable to erosion, plundering, or political neglect. Some believe that the temples may have been intentionally defaced during later dynasties, particularly as religious ideologies shifted. By the New Kingdom, Ra had merged into the more complex deity of Amun-Ra, and many of the earlier sun cult rituals had been replaced or reinterpreted. But even within the 5th dynasty, the sun temples seem to carry a deeper enigma. Of the 6 kings who are believed to have constructed such temples, only 2, those of Userkaf and Neosere, have been positively identified and excavated in part. Others, like Sahur's, remain largely buried or lost altogether, and even the ones that have been studied leave no clear explanation as to why this architectural tradition rose so suddenly, then ceased just as quickly. Could the solar temples have held a function we've yet to fully grasp? Some researchers propose that they may have operated as observational tools, early solar observatories that marked the movement of the sun through the seasons, used for agricultural planning or ritual alignment. Others suggest they were meant to harness symbolic energy, their obelisks acting as spiritual beacons, channeling divine light into the physical realm. A few more speculative voices ask whether these temples were part of a forgotten technological tradition, structures that worked in tandem with Egypt's sacred geometry and knowledge of celestial mechanics. If so, what knowledge has been lost with the stones? The name Field of Ra itself invites reflection. Was the temple merely a stage for ceremonial offerings? Or did the ancient Egyptians believe this was a true field of divine presence, a liminal zone where the physical and celestial worlds met? Today, Sahur's Sun Temple remains inaccessible to the public, overgrown and unexcavated in many parts. It rests beneath layers of earth, time, and modern obscurity, a monument to the sun, hidden from the sun. And so we are left with a paradox. A temple built for light now lost in shadow. A structure meant to proclaim the eternal presence of the sun god, now known only through fragments, footnotes, and broken stone. What happened to the solar temple of Sakura? Why was it built with such intention, then left to disappear? And what truths about Egypt's understanding of the cosmos, of life, kingship, light, might still lie buried in the sand? As the sun sets over Abusir, casting long shadows over the desert, one is reminded that even the most radiant monuments can vanish, and that sometimes the brightest mysteries leave the faintest traces behind. The wands of protection. As the fading sun retreats behind the sands of Abusir, leaving the solar temple of Sakura cloaked in quiet mystery, we turn now to a different kind of artifact, smaller in scale, yet steeped in an equally enigmatic aura. These are not grand monuments or towering obelisks, but slender carved objects, once tucked into burial goods, clutched in the hands of the dead or hidden beneath linen wrappings. They are known as wands of protection, and they carry with them the echoes of a spiritual world still barely understood. Most of these curved wands, typically crafted from hippopotamus ivory, were discovered in tombs dating from the Middle Kingdom, roughly between 2550 and 1650 BC. Yet their style, symbolism, and function suggest far older roots. Each wand, no more than a foot in length, is intricately inscribed with scenes of fantastical beings, hieroglyphic invocations, and most curiously, an array of animal-headed figures that seem to walk a fine line between the mythic and the otherworldly. Jackal-headed guardians, serpent-tailed creatures, lion-faced deities flanked by wielders of knives. These are not representations of the major gods of Egypt, Ra, Osiris, or Isis, but a different pantheon entirely. Figures without temples, without mythology, whose roles seem bound more to magic than theology. What were these beings meant to do? And who or what did they protect against? Mainstream scholars interpret the wands as ritual tools, likely used in protective ceremonies surrounding childbirth, early infancy, and funerary rites. The curved shape, reminiscent of a crescent or tusk, is often associated with feminine power and the defensive strength of wild animals. Hippopotamuses in particular were symbols of ferocity and motherhood, especially the goddess Taweret, who appears frequently in protective contexts. Some of the wands are inscribed with phrases invoking life, health, and rebirth. Others depict knife-wielding spirits battling serpents or guarding gateways. The suggestion is clear. These objects served as spiritual shields, crafted to guard the vulnerable from unseen forces not just of illness or danger, but of chaos itself. Yet despite the common themes of protection and rebirth, the figures carved into these wands remain elusive. Many are composite beings, part animal, part human, whose features do not appear in traditional temple art. Some hold serpents or staffs. Others seem to move in pairs, guarding doorways or enclosing sacred space. Their forms suggest motion, intention, even personality, but not identity. Who were these entities? Were they personal guardians summoned through ritual and given form in ivory? Or were they echoes of a forgotten belief system, preserved only through these surviving talismans? Some researchers have suggested that the wands represent beings from the liminal spaces of Egyptian cosmology, the thresholds between life and death, between birth and the afterlife. In this interpretation, the wands acted not just as charms, but as tools of navigation, guiding the soul, repelling hostile forces, and creating a safe passage between worlds. Others see in the iconography a much older stratum of belief, something pre-dynastic, even shamanic. The use of animal forms, particularly in combination, is a motif found in spiritual traditions across the ancient world. Could these wands be remnants of a more primal Egyptian spirituality, preserved in private rites long after state religion evolved into formalized theology? Even more puzzling is the geographic spread. Fragments of similar wands, though less elaborate, have been found in regions far from the Nile Valley, in Nubia, the Levant, and even parts of Mesopotamia. The resemblance is not always exact, but the themes recur. Animals guarding thresholds, curved ivory forms, inscriptions invoking protection. Was this a shared tradition among ancient cultures, A set of symbols passed along trade routes or inherited from a common spiritual ancestor? Or is the similarity merely coincidence, testament to the universality of fear and hope in the face of the unknown? And then there is the silence of the temples. Unlike other religious artifacts, the protective wands do not appear in temple rituals or public festivals. They are almost entirely confined to private, domestic, or funerary contexts. No ancient text explains their origin. No priestly decree defines their use. They exist at the margins between the official and the personal, the sacred and the secret. Were they intentionally excluded from public religion? Or did they serve a parallel spiritual function, one outside the control of the state-sanctioned priesthood? Many of the surviving wands are now housed in museums, placed behind glass, labeled as amulets or ceremonial objects. But to see one up close is to feel something more. The grooves worn into the ivory by ancient hands, the deliberate, almost obsessive detail in the carving, the expressions on the animal faces, neither benign nor cruel, but watchful, as if they are still performing their task thousands of years later. What knowledge shaped their creation? What fears did they guard against? And what role did they play in the intimate, invisible lives of the ancient Egyptians? As night falls over the desert and the ancient necropolises grow still once more, the protective wands remain, silent witnesses to a belief system, both familiar and strange. Perhaps they were never meant to be fully understood. Perhaps their magic lies in what they do not reveal. And so we wonder, what do these ivory guardians still protect? And what truths carved in their delicate forms remain hidden, just beyond our reach? The unexplored Western Desert. From the intimate protective carvings of ivory wands, objects born of spiritual necessity and buried in the arms of the vulnerable, we now shift our gaze to a far grander and more silent mystery. Beyond the Nile, beyond the temples, beyond even the known borders of ancient Egyptian civilization, lies a vast and haunting expanse, the Western Desert. It stretches westward like an ocean of stone and sand, barren, windswept, and deceptively empty. But scattered throughout this desolation are whispers of something far older than the pharaohs. Faint outlines of structures half buried by dunes, rock carvings that speak in forgotten tongues, shattered tools and stone circles that predate history itself. These are the unexplored sites of Egypt's Western Desert, places few have seen and even fewer have understood. At first glance, the Western Desert seems inhospitable. Temperatures soar by day, plummet by night, water is scarce, vegetation is almost non-existent. And yet, the evidence is undeniable. Thousands of years ago, this land was alive. Satellite imagery and ground expeditions have revealed ancient trackways, caravan routes, and settlements buried beneath layers of sand. Archaeologists have identified dry riverbeds, once flowing tributaries that would have supported agriculture, wildlife, and human settlement. Around the Gilf Kabir Plateau and the Great Sand Sea, remnants of early human activity date back as far as 9000 BC, when the Sahara was green and lush. One of the most enigmatic sites in this forgotten landscape is Nabta Playa. Located near the modern-day border with Sudan, Nabta is a prehistoric ceremonial center that challenges our understanding of time. Here, megalithic stones, some weighing several tons, were arranged in precise patterns that appear to mark astronomical alignments. A central circle, often compared to Stonehenge, aligns with the summer solstice sunrise. Radiating spokes suggest knowledge of the cardinal directions, and certain arrangements may even correspond to the rising of specific stars in Orion's belt. But Nabta dates to at least 6000 BC, thousands of years before the pyramids, before hieroglyphs, before the unified Egyptian state. Who built it? And how did they possess such sophisticated understanding of the heavens? Mainstream theories suggest that these were early cattle herders, part of a mobile pastoral culture that migrated across the Sahara during its brief wet phase. They may have used the sky as a calendar, tracking the seasons to guide grazing patterns. The monument in this view was both practical and spiritual, a gathering place that blended observation and ceremony. But not all researchers are satisfied with this explanation. The precision of the alignments, the scale of the labor involved, and the symbolic parallels with later Egyptian religious motifs particularly the association with Orion in the afterlife, have led some to speculate that Nabta Playa was not an isolated invention, but part of a deeper cultural lineage, a precursor to the cosmology that would later dominate Egyptian thought. Could the builders of Nabta have been the intellectual ancestors of the pyramid architects? Or were they drawing on an even older tradition, one now lost to time and sand? And Nabta is not alone. Throughout the Western Desert, explorers have stumbled upon petroglyphs, rock carvings of animals no longer found in the region: giraffes, elephants, even crocodiles. These are not idle doodles. Many are etched with care, spaced evenly, arranged in groupings that hint at ritual or storytelling. At sites like the Cave of Swimmers in the Gilf Kabir, haunting human figures seem to drift across the walls, arms outstretched as if suspended in water. Were these images symbolic, ceremonial, or records of a world that once existed, a world where the desert was a sea of grass, and humanity's earliest beliefs took root in the shifting soil? More recently, archaeological teams have uncovered mud brick structures, storage pits, and possible burial sites scattered across the desert's edge. But many of these remain unstudied, hidden not just by geography, but by political instability, extreme conditions, and lack of funding. What lies beneath the dunes? Are there temples, cities, or even forgotten civilizations waiting to be rediscovered? Some researchers believe the desert may conceal the remains of entire cultures, ones that rose and fell before dynastic Egypt emerged, cultures whose memory survives only as myths embedded in later Egyptian stories of gods who ruled before men, of golden ages buried beneath the horizon. More speculative theories propose even more radical ideas. Could the Western Desert be the missing link between Egypt and other ancient centers of knowledge? Did knowledge flow westward from the Nile or eastward from deeper Africa? Or did it rise briefly and brightly in these now desolate lands, only to be swept away by climate collapse, leaving only monuments to mark their passing? Mainstream archaeology remains cautious, grounded in what the evidence can support, but even here the silence speaks volumes. The Western Desert has been only lightly explored. Much of its potential remains buried, unexamined, undocumented. A few expeditions, a scattering of surveys, hardly enough to map a region the size of a small country. And with every shifting dune, the past slips further from reach. Yet the landscape still calls. Even in its emptiness, the Western Desert suggests something vast and unresolved, a place where time bends and the boundary between history and prehistory blurs. What was Egypt before Egypt? Who were the desert people who looked to the stars, raised stones in alignment with celestial rhythms, and vanished before the world took notice? Perhaps their voices are still there, etched in stone, waiting to be heard, waiting for the sand to shift just enough to reveal the next forgotten chapter. The false doors. From the windswept silence of Egypt's Western Desert, where ancient roads vanish into sand and stars guided the forgotten, our journey now returns to stone, to carved chambers nestled deep within the bedrock of Egypt's necropolises. Inside tombs built not for the living, but for eternity, there is a recurring presence, a shape carved into the walls like an architectural illusion. It is not a doorway in the physical sense. There is no passage, no threshold, but a symbol chiseled with purpose, a portal not meant to open into this world. These are the so-called false doors. Found throughout the Old Kingdom and beyond, these carved panels appear most often in mastabas and elite tombs, particularly between the 3rd and 6th dynasties, around 2700 to 2200 BC. They vary in size and complexity. Some are simple stelae, others are elaborately framed with columns, offering tables, and inscribed prayers. But they all share a common visual vocabulary, a central niche or panel, often flanked by decorative elements that suggest a doorframe. And most curiously, they are placed in walls that lead nowhere. At first glance, the false door seems symbolic, perhaps decorative. But for the ancient Egyptians, it was much more than that. It was believed to be the point of contact between the world of the living and the world of the dead, a threshold through which the Ka, the spiritual essence of a person, could pass. Offerings left by relatives, bread, beer, incense, water, were placed before these doors so that the deceased could absorb their essence, nourished by remembrance and ritual. Mainstream Egyptology supports this view. The false door was a sacred technology, a metaphysical conduit between dimensions. It wasn't designed to be used in the physical sense. It was a door for the soul, not the body. Yet the physical care and craftsmanship devoted to these false doors suggest a deeper complexity. Why construct something with such material precision, carved into limestone, aligned to cardinal points, and inscribed with elaborate texts if it were only symbolic? Some false doors are positioned with astonishing architectural precision, aligned with shafts that run deep into the tomb, or placed directly opposite offering chapels lit by the rising sun. The orientation appears intentional, suggesting that they weren't merely decorative carvings, but functional elements in a ritual system that may have included sound, light, and sacred geometry. What exactly did the Egyptians believe was happening at the false door? Some scholars propose that the space around the door was used in ritual reenactments. Priests or family members might perform gestures, recite prayers, or make offerings at specific times of day, seasons, or celestial alignments. The door served as a focal point, a site where the realms intersected, if only briefly. But there are no complete records of how such ceremonies were performed. We are left with inscriptions, imagery, and structures whose full meaning has faded like pigment on stone. And then come the stranger patterns. Some false doors appear in unexpected places, hidden inside chambers, placed in tombs with no other elaborate decoration, or inscribed with figures that do not represent the tomb's occupant. There are cases where multiple false doors are found in a single tomb, sometimes facing each other across a narrow space, as if forming a passage for something unseen. Were these merely symbolic redundancies, or did they mark specific metaphysical zones, spaces intended for movement, communication, or perhaps even containment? A few fringe theorists have proposed more speculative possibilities. Could the false doors represent more than spiritual access points? Might they have functioned as cognitive tools? Architectural focal points meant to induce altered states of awareness in the living? A place where mourning became communion, where ritual intention shaped perception. Others point to the resonance of carved stone, suggesting that chanting or ritual music within the tomb's architecture, focused on the false door, could have created specific acoustic effects. Could sound, architecture, and belief have been deliberately combined to simulate or facilitate an encounter with the beyond? In one notable example, the tomb of Ti at Saqqara, dated to the 5th dynasty, features a highly detailed false door surrounded by vibrant reliefs of daily life, cattle herding, boat building, harvesting. The contrast is striking. While the scenes depict motion and activity, the false door remains still, framed and separate, as if it observes silently from another realm. What was Ti trying to communicate about his continued presence in the world? What did he hope to receive or to return through that carved threshold? And then there's the question of who had access to these doorways. Were they meant only for the deceased, or could certain individuals, priests, initiates, or family members interact with the spirit realm through these portals in meaningful ways? The Egyptians never saw death as an ending. It was a transition, a shift into another phase of being that required guidance, offerings, and sacred architecture. The false door was not a metaphor. It was a mechanism, a piece of spiritual infrastructure. But how exactly did it work? Today, many false doors are worn and eroded. The chapels are empty, the offerings long vanished. The names etched into stone are silent, their voices forgotten. Yet the doors remain uncannily intact, standing in stone corridors that lead nowhere and everywhere. They remind us that for the ancient Egyptians, the boundaries between life and death were never as solid as we imagine, that the soul, like the desert wind, needed a way to return, a way to pass through. And so we ask, what passed through these doors? Were they invitations to the sacred or warnings to the unprepared? What secrets still linger on the threshold, just out of reach? The temple beneath the Giza plateau. From the carved thresholds of Egypt's tombs, false doors that open not into corridors of stone, but into unseen realms. We now return to one of the most iconic and scrutinized landscapes on Earth. A place where mystery lies not just in what stands above ground, but in what may lie hidden below. Here at the foot of the Great Pyramid, beneath layers of bedrock and centuries of speculation, whispers persist of something lost, a structure yet undiscovered, a temple beneath the Giza Plateau. The Giza Plateau rises like a vast stage on the edge of Cairo's ever-encroaching urban sprawl. The pyramids of Khufu, Kafra, and Menkaure dominate the skyline, monuments of stone that have stood for over 4,000 years. Beside them, the enigmatic Sphinx gazes eastward, its gaze locked on the horizon. But for all the attention paid to these visible giants, the ground beneath their foundations holds stories we are only beginning to suspect. Ancient texts, local legends, and modern scans suggest that Giza may not be a completed picture, but a layered one. Some of the oldest traditions speak of a hidden chamber, a buried sanctuary dedicated not to a king, but to the gods, or perhaps something older than gods. Herodotus, the Greek historian who visited Egypt in the 5th century BC, described underground chambers beneath the pyramids. Later Arab accounts, such as those of al-Makrisi and Abd al-Latif, speak of tunnels, trapdoors, and forbidden passages beneath the Sphinx and the plateau itself. Were these merely mythic embellishments or echoes of something real? In the late 20th and early 21st centuries, modern tools brought new intrigue. Ground-penetrating radar surveys and seismic scans conducted in areas surrounding the Sphinx and the Great Pyramid revealed anomalies, subsurface cavities, regular geometric shapes, and possible corridors carved into the bedrock. One such anomaly lies just south of the Sphinx, a rectangular void beneath the pause where no chambers were previously known to exist. Egyptian authorities have long denied the presence of significant unexplored structures beneath Giza. Official excavations have focused on cataloging existing monuments and restoring visible temples. Yet independent researchers, engineers, geophysicists, and fringe historians alike continue to question whether the story is truly complete. The idea of a lost temple beneath the plateau is not new. Some propose that it predates the pyramids entirely. If true, it could belong to a pre-dynastic era, before writing, before pharaohs, perhaps even to a time when oral traditions remembered gods walking among men, a temple of initiation, a place of hidden knowledge. What might such a structure have looked like? Some point to the Oeran at Abbidos, a megalithic underground chamber constructed with cyclopean granite blocks, sunken below the temple of Seti I. Others reference the valley temple of Kafra itself, whose core construction features enormous uninscribed limestone blocks suggestive of a much earlier phase of building. Could there be another such temple still buried? And if there is, why has it remained concealed? The geology of Giza provides both challenge and cover. The plateau is composed of stratified limestone layers, some more resistant to erosion than others. Subterranean chambers would be difficult to detect without comprehensive and sustained scanning. Even when anomalies are found, distinguishing natural fissures from human-made structures is complex and politically delicate. Moreover, the archaeological narrative of Giza has long been guarded. To entertain the possibility of a hidden structure that predates the pyramids raises uncomfortable questions. Who built it? Why was it hidden? And what knowledge, if any, might be contained within? Some speculative theories verge on the fantastic, proposing connections to lost civilizations, Atlantean mythologies, or extraterrestrial influences. These theories often leap beyond the evidence, but their core question remains valid. Have we truly explored everything beneath Giza? What we do know is that the plateau was more than a royal necropolis. It was a ritual landscape engineered with celestial precision. The alignment of the pyramids with Orion's belt, the solar symbolism of the Sphinx, the orientation of temples to cardinal points, all speak to a deeper intention. If a hidden temple does lie beneath, it would not be accidental. It would be part of this grand design, a place not for the masses, but for the initiated, a chamber not meant to glorify kings, but to preserve something sacred. And if such a place exists untouched for millennia, what condition would it be in? Would it be empty, long looted by ancient hands, or sealed, undisturbed, its purpose still intact? Today, most of the plateau remains closed to deep excavation. The ground near the Sphinx is protected, and permits to dig in sensitive areas are rarely granted. For now, the anomalies remain unconfirmed, The scans are filed away. The mysteries rest beneath layers of limestone and bureaucracy. But the questions linger. Could the key to understanding Egypt's true origins lie not in its monuments, but beneath them? Have we been looking too long at what towers above, and not long enough at what waits below? And perhaps the most haunting question of all, what if just meters beneath our feet, the sands of Giza still guard a truth we are not yet ready to uncover? The Blue Lotus. As the night settles gently over the Giza Plateau, casting shadows across the silent pyramids and whatever secrets may lie beneath them, we turn our attention to something more delicate, a symbol not carved in stone, but drawn in ink, painted on papyrus, and pressed into temple walls. A flower, the Nymphea caerulea, the sacred blue lotus. It appears everywhere in ancient Egyptian art, clutched in the hands of gods, emerging from the mouths of kings, blooming beside the sun god in scenes of cosmic rebirth. At first glance, it might seem purely symbolic, a beautiful flourish. But the blue lotus is more than an artistic motif. It is a mystery in its own right, one deeply entwined with ritual, healing, and perhaps even altered states of consciousness. The blue lotus was native to the Nile and its tributaries, thriving in slow-moving waters. Its blossoms opened each morning with the rising sun and closed again at dusk. This daily rhythm, so elegantly tied to light and darkness, life and death, made it an enduring metaphor for rebirth. In religious texts, it is from a lotus that the sun god Ra is said to have first emerged at the beginning of creation. It is not just a plant, it is a cosmic principle. And yet, beyond the myth, there are signs of a more practical, more experiential role. In tomb paintings and stelae, we find images of banquet scenes, men and women reclining, drinking, adorned with garlands of lotus flowers. The flower is often held to the nose, not simply admired, but inhaled. Sometimes it's infused into wine. Sometimes it's presented in isolation, hovering beside a figure in states of reverie. What exactly was being consumed? Modern chemical analysis has revealed that Nymphea caerulea contains apomorphine and nuciferine, alkaloids that have mild psychoactive and sedative properties. When steeped in wine or infused into oil, it can produce sensations of euphoria, tranquility, and dreamlike awareness. In large doses, it may even alter perception. Was the blue lotus used to induce trance states, to soften the veil between worlds during rites, or in temples during communion with the divine? Some Egyptologists believe so. The flower's presence in religious scenes is too consistent, its context too focused to dismiss. It is often associated with the god Nefertem, depicted with a lotus emerging from his head, who was invoked in temple rituals as a healer and intermediary of light. In this view, the blue lotus was both medicine and spiritual instrument, but the texts are vague. No ancient Egyptian pharmacopoeia has survived to explain dosage, preparation, or ceremonial use. Instead, we're left with visual clues, scattered references, and indirect associations. Could it be that its use was part of an oral tradition, transmitted only through priesthoods and never recorded in writing? More speculative theories suggest that the blue lotus may have played a central role in the mystery schools of Egypt, esoteric institutions believed by some to have preserved ancient knowledge of the soul, the cosmos, and the afterlife. According to this line of thought, initiates may have used lotus infusions to enter altered states, dreams guided by trained priests to receive visions, teachings, or communion with ancestral spirits. While no conclusive evidence supports this view, it aligns with practices found in other ancient cultures. From the Eleusinian mysteries of Greece to shamanic traditions in Central America, the use of psychoactive plants as tools for ritual transformation is well documented. Might Egypt too have had its own living pharmacology? There are even those who argue that the blue lotus was not a solitary substance, but one element in a larger sacred pharmacopoeia combined with wine, honey, or other plants in complex rituals of death, healing, and rebirth. Could this explain the recurrence of certain motifs, scenes of music, perfume, and ecstatic movement around blue lotus imagery? The truth remains elusive. Despite the plant's unmistakable presence in Egypt's visual language, hard evidence of its ritual use remains just out of reach. Archaeobotanical remains are rare. Ancient wine jars, even those with lotus residue, are often too degraded to yield full chemical profiles. And without textual confirmation, the line between ceremony and symbolism remains blurred. What we are left with is a flower that defies simplicity. It is at once sacred and sensual, mythic and medicinal. It represents creation and decay, the light of the sun and the stillness of water. And always it is placed in the most charged moments, in the hands of the dead, at the birth of gods, in the banquets of eternity. Did the Egyptians simply love its scent and symbolism? Or did they understand something about its effects that we have forgotten? As the petals of the blue lotus open again in the mind's eye, it invites us to look beyond the visible, to imagine ritual not just as performance, but as experience, and to consider that the greatest mysteries may not be found only in temples or tombs, but in the quiet, floating blossoms of the Nile, gently opening toward the sun. What dreams did the ancients see when they drank from this sacred flower? And what truths might still lie hidden in its delicate blue bloom? The hidden void within the Great Pyramid. As the image of the blue lotus fades, a symbol of transcendence quietly blooming upon the waters of the Nile, we return once more to Giza, but this time not to what lies beneath or beyond, but to what lies within. Rising from the limestone bedrock in precise, deliberate symmetry, the Great Pyramid of Khufu stands not only as the oldest of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, but also its most enduring mystery. For millennia, it has towered over the desert, a mountain of 2.3 million stone blocks, each placed with astonishing precision. Scholars have studied its angles, debated its proportions, mapped its corridors and chambers. And yet, even after centuries of exploration, one question continues to deepen rather than resolve. What is hidden inside? In 2017, a new chapter in the mystery was opened, not through excavation, but through particle physics. Using a non-invasive technique known as muon radiography, where cosmic particles known as muons are tracked as they pass through solid stone, researchers from the Scan Pyramids project identified an anomaly, a void, a space approximately 30 meters long, positioned above the Grand Gallery and sealed within the core of the pyramid. It was not known from previous maps or architectural models. It had no connection to known passageways, no inscription, no entrance. It appeared to be completely isolated. The discovery sent a ripple through both the academic world and the public imagination. For the first time in centuries, we had found a new space within Khufu's pyramid, something untouched, unseen, and unknown. But what is it? Mainstream Egyptologists were quick to offer cautious interpretations. Some suggested that the void might simply be a relieving chamber, an architectural necessity to reduce the weight of the stone above the Grand Gallery. Others proposed that it could be part of the internal ramp theory, a hypothesized construction method that involves spiraling corridors built within the pyramid rather than outside. But the shape and scale of the void raised eyebrows. A relieving space perhaps, but 30 meters in length? That would make it comparable in size to the Grand Gallery itself. Its symmetry, its positioning along the central axis of the pyramid. These elements suggest intentionality. If not structural, then what? Some researchers have proposed that the chamber may have held symbolic or ritual significance. The pyramid was, after all, more than a tomb. It was a machine of resurrection, a spiritual engine designed to propel the pharaoh's soul into the afterlife. Every angle, every alignment, every passage had meaning. Could this mysterious void have played a role in that cosmic journey? Was it a storage space for sacred objects? Items necessary for the pharaoh's transformation that were sealed away and never meant to be retrieved? Or was it a symbolic chamber, a dwat within the stone, echoing the mythic passage through the underworld? And then, of course, there are the more speculative theories. Some suggest the chamber could be the legendary Hall of Records, a hypothetical archive said to contain lost knowledge from a forgotten civilization. While most mainstream scholars dismiss this idea as pure myth, it persists in fringe circles, fueled by tantalizing gaps in our understanding and the still undiscovered contents of the pyramid's hidden spaces. Others wonder whether the void was meant to be accessed at all. Could it have been a chamber not for humans, but for gods? Or for rituals conducted remotely, perhaps through resonance, light, or vibration? For now, the chamber remains sealed. No tunnels lead to it. no probes have entered. Egyptian authorities have so far restricted further exploration, citing the need for preservation and caution. The mystery remains, quite literally, out of reach. And yet the questions refuse to disappear. This is not the first unknown space discovered inside the Great Pyramid. In the 19th century, tiny air shafts were found leading from the king's and queen's chambers to the outer surface of the pyramid. Their function remains debated: ventilation, star alignments, spiritual escape routes. In 2002, a robotic probe exploring one of these shafts encountered a small stone door fitted with copper handles. Beyond it, another chamber, another sealed space, another question. The Great Pyramid does not give up its secrets easily. Each discovery deepens the enigma rather than resolves it. It is worth remembering that Khufu's burial chamber itself contains no inscriptions, no sarcophagus lid, no funerary text, no evidence, in fact, that a burial ever took place. Some believe the pharaoh's body was stolen in antiquity. Others believe it was never placed there at all. Was the pyramid a tomb or something else entirely? The newly discovered void challenges our assumptions. It reminds us that even within the most studied structure in the ancient world, there is room for surprise. And so we are left with a silent, hidden chamber, 30 meters of darkness sealed in stone, hovering above a pathway once walked by builders, priests, perhaps even kings. What lies inside? Stone, air, something more? We do not yet know. But perhaps that is what the pyramid has always offered us, not just answers, but invitation to wonder, to imagine, to seek. What else lies within the heart of Khufu's pyramid, waiting in the quiet for us to listen? The crook and flail. From the hidden void within Khufu's pyramid, a silent chamber sealed in stone, we turn now to two smaller, more familiar objects, symbols often overlooked for their ubiquity, yet steeped in layers of meaning that remain to this day partially veiled. Found in tomb paintings, statues, reliefs, in sacred iconography, they are always held tightly in the arms of the pharaoh, the Heka, and the Nekaka, the crook and flail. Crossed over the chest of kings, carved into sarcophagi, or grasped by the god Osiris himself, these tools are among the most instantly recognizable emblems of ancient Egyptian authority. And yet, while their form is clear, their full significance, their true ceremonial purpose remains one of Egypt's quieter mysteries. The crook curved at the end like a shepherd's staff, the flail composed of 3 strands, knotted and bound. Together they represent rulership, but perhaps something more. The standard interpretation sees the crook as a symbol of guidance, the shepherd's tool used to lead the flock, to protect and direct. The flail, meanwhile, is often associated with discipline or kingship over agriculture, a symbol of fertility tied to the threshing of grain. In this reading, the pharaoh holds both mercy and justice, sustenance and command. But look closer and questions begin to arise. The flail, as it appears in art and sculpture, bears little resemblance to the flails used for agriculture. It is not the broad implement used to beat wheat or barley. It is more compact, more abstract. Its strands are often rendered stiff, even stylized, their true material unknown. Nor does it resemble any known weapon of war. What then was it? And the crook, though more visually aligned with the shepherd's tool, is never depicted in use. It is always held upright, across the chest, close to the body, reverent, almost defensive. Was it truly meant to represent animal husbandry? Or did it have a more sacred function? We know that both the crook and flail were already associated with power during Egypt's earliest dynasties, as far back as 3000 BC. They appear in the hands of Osiris in some of the oldest known depictions, long before many other gods acquired their standard iconography. This has led some scholars to propose that these were not just royal regalia, they were instruments of divine legitimacy, relics inherited from a mythic past when gods ruled the land. Could they have been ritual objects before they were political ones? One possibility is that the crook and flail were not symbolic at all, but functional, used in temple rituals, perhaps during the coronation or rejuvenation ceremonies of the king. The said festival, a renewal rite held in the 30th year of a pharaoh's reign, often included the redonning of these items, a symbolic rebirth of kingship, but the precise role they played in these rites is unrecorded. The priests who enacted these mysteries left behind no manuals, no instructions, only images. And so we are left to reconstruct from context. In many tombs, the crook and flail are placed upon the mummy, reinforcing the belief that the king remained ruler even in death. In statues, they appear not only in the hands of kings, but of gods, Osiris, Anubis, even Horus. Were they tools of judgment, instruments of spiritual control? A more speculative interpretation links the crook and flail to cosmic balance. In this view, the pharaoh did not merely rule the people, he maintained Ma'at, the divine order of the universe. The crook guided the soul, the flail regulated the forces of nature. One hand for the seen world, the other for the unseen. Still others look to the material. Though most surviving crooks and flails are depicted in reliefs or statues, a few physical examples have been uncovered, notably in the tomb of Tutankhamun. His crook and flail were crafted from golden blue glass, inlaid with lapis lazuli, precious materials associated with the heavens. This celestial composition has led some to suggest that the regalia had astrological significance, acting as symbolic instruments of the sky. Perhaps they aligned with constellations. Perhaps they echoed rituals once performed under certain star patterns, long forgotten by the time of the New Kingdom. Even more tantalizing is the possibility that the crook and flail were once part of an ancient liturgical toolkit, belonging to a class of ritual objects that predate recorded history, objects with original functions that were lost as myth overtook memory. Could they have once been used in the navigation of trance states or to mark boundaries between sacred and profane space? The absence of definitive texts is striking. For all Egypt's monumental inscriptions and ritual books, the crook and flail remain unexplained. They are shown again and again in art, but never discussed directly. Their meanings are suggested, never defined. It is as if their power was so self-evident that no elaboration was needed, or as if that knowledge was meant to remain hidden. Perhaps the crook and flail were never meant to be understood by the masses. Perhaps their power lay not in what they did, but in what they represented to those who knew. Today they remain icons. Museum visitors walk past them without a second glance, absorbed by gold masks and sarcophagi. Yet these two simple shapes, the curve and the strike, carry within them a coded language of ancient sovereignty, divine order, and spiritual guardianship. Why were they always crossed? Why always silent? And what does it mean that even now we do not truly know what they were meant to do? In the quiet halls of forgotten temples, in the still air of sealed tombs, perhaps the answers remain, written not in words, but in the posture of a king, hands crossed over his heart, holding symbols of a power we have yet to fully remember. The desert kites of Fayum. From the tightly held regalia of the pharaoh, the crook and flail crossed in solemn silence. We move now to a far older enigma, hidden in the arid plains, where Egypt's cultivated lands begin to dissolve into the vast empty desert. South of Cairo, near the lush basin of the Fayum Depression, ancient lines stretch across the sand. Long, low stone walls, often V-shaped, diverging like open wings, fading into the dust. These are the so-called desert kites. Their name kite comes not from Egyptian antiquity, but from the aerial photographs taken in the early 20th century when pilots flying reconnaissance missions over the Middle East first noticed these strange geometric forms. From the sky, they resemble vast kites, two converging lines leading to a central enclosure, sometimes miles in length. They appear across arid regions of North Africa and the Arabian Peninsula. But in Egypt, their presence near Fayum poses a quiet mystery, one that has only recently drawn renewed attention. On foot, the structures are nearly invisible. Their walls, often no more than half a meter high, blend into the surrounding rock and sand. They are too low to serve as fortifications, too long to be tombs or dwellings. Some stretch for kilometers, weaving through the barren terrain, ending in circular or corral-like areas enclosed by stone. They are ancient. Some radiocarbon dating suggests they may be older than 5,000 BC. Yet no one knows exactly who built them or why. The prevailing theory is that desert kites were used for hunting. According to this view, the long stone arms would guide wild animals, gazelles, oryx, perhaps even now extinct species, into the enclosures where hunters could trap or kill them more easily. The structures would have functioned as massive funneling systems, invisible enough not to alarm prey until it was too late to escape. This method of hunting would have allowed small groups of people to capture large numbers of animals with minimal effort. But this theory, while plausible, opens further questions. For one, the scale of these structures is staggering. Some involve kilometers of carefully placed stonework, far more labor-intensive than what might be expected for a temporary or seasonal hunting strategy. Their design is deliberate, consistent, suggesting coordination, knowledge, and purpose. Were these truly the tools of nomadic hunters? Or do they reflect something more complex? Some researchers have suggested that the desert kites were not just about sustenance, but ritual. Perhaps the hunt itself was ceremonial, an act reenacting mythic cycles of death and renewal, tied to the sacred rhythm of the land. If so, the kite wasn't just a trap, it was a stage, a place where survival and belief were woven into one. Others have noted that many of these structures align with celestial points or follow topographical features in ways that hint at a deeper understanding of space. Could the enclosures have doubled as ritual spaces marking astronomical events? Could they have served seasonal functions tied to the migration of animals or the rise of certain stars? There is also the question of what happened after the kill. Some kites end in large open areas. Others terminate in tightly walled spaces that seem far too small to hold large numbers of animals. No bones have been definitively linked to their use. No inscriptions offer clarity. Did the animals escape? Were they sacrificed? Or were they never captured at all? Then there is the cultural gap. The builders of the Fayum kites left no known written records, no tombs, no temples. Their identity is unknown. They predate dynastic Egypt, yet seem to share in its same architectural intentionality. Were they part of a precursor culture, a regional population whose memory was later absorbed into the mythos of the Nile? Interestingly, the Fayum region itself is a place of deep ancient continuity. Its fertile lake system supported some of Egypt's earliest agricultural settlements. Some archaeologists believe that sedentary life began here earlier than anywhere else in the Nile Valley. Could the desert kites reflect a transitional moment, a culture moving from hunting to herding, using stone not just to catch prey, but to shape its landscape? More speculative voices suggest even stranger ideas. Could the kites be symbolic maps, pilgrimage routes, representations of constellations, or sacred geometry carved into the earth? Some theories liken them to geoglyphs like the Nazca lines of Peru, large-scale, low-relief designs whose full patterns only emerge from above. Were the kites intended to be seen from the sky? And if so, by whom? There is little to anchor these ideas in evidence, and yet the mystery persists. Despite modern technology, drones, satellite imaging, ground surveys, no conclusive answer has emerged. The desert holds its silence. The stones remain, half buried in windblown sand, their purpose still intact but unspoken. The desert kites near Fayum are not grand monuments like the pyramids. They do not promise gold, nor reveal the names of kings, but they challenge us all the same. Who built them? What knowledge did they encode into these elegant geometric arms that stretch like wings across the land? Were they tools for survival, ritual, worship, or something else entirely, something we have yet to imagine? As the sun lowers over the Fayum Basin, casting long shadows across the shallow ridgeline of these forgotten walls, we are left with quiet forms that defy explanation. Lines drawn in a language we no longer speak. What story were the stones trying to tell? And what lies just beyond their reach, still waiting to be understood? Non-Egyptian artifacts in royal tombs. As the sun disappears behind the low ridgeline of Fayum, casting long shadows over the ancient desert kites, we return once again to the depths of Egypt's sacred chambers, into tombs sealed with gold, stone, and spells. Places where pharaohs were entombed with the treasures they believed they would need in the afterlife. Amulets, thrones, statues of gods, chariots, and weapons. But amid these unmistakably Egyptian items, something else occasionally appears, something unexpected. Objects foreign in style, material, or origin, artifacts that do not seem to belong. These are the non-Egyptian artifacts found in royal tombs, mysterious pieces that raise a simple yet perplexing question. How did they get here? Take, for instance, the famous tomb of Tutankhamun, discovered in 1922 by Howard Carter. Among its thousands of items, many of which are masterworks of Egyptian craftsmanship, were a handful that stood apart: a dagger with a blade made not of forged metal, but of meteoritic iron, a scarab carved from Libyan desert glass, a material formed only under extreme heat, possibly from a meteor impact. There were also inlays, beads, and fragments of materials that did not originate along the Nile: lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, cedar wood from Lebanon, ebony likely from Central Africa. On one level, these findings are unsurprising. Egypt was never fully isolated. From the early dynastic period, it traded extensively with neighboring cultures: Byblos, Nubia, Punt, and later the Mycenaeans and Hittites. Caravans and river barges moved goods in and out of the empire. The presence of foreign materials then could simply reflect this rich web of economic and diplomatic exchange. But not all anomalies are so easily explained. Some artifacts defy not just geographical expectations, but chronological ones. At Abbidos and Saqqara, tombs from the Old and Middle Kingdoms have yielded beads made from materials not believed to have been traded until centuries later. The techniques used in crafting certain gold filigree or inlaid stones resemble methods more common to Mesopotamian or Anatolian traditions than native Egyptian styles of the same period. In other cases, small figurines or decorative motifs echo iconography found far beyond Egypt's borders. Stylized animal forms, geometric patterns, or scenes of combat rendered not in the fluid symbolic style of Egypt, but with an angularity more akin to steppe cultures or Aegean design. Are these the results of imported objects, or did the artisans themselves move, bringing their traditions into Egyptian workshops? Then there is the matter of unexplained precision. The meteorite dagger found in Tutankhamun's tomb is a well-documented marvel composed of iron with high nickel content, a composition matching known meteorites. But what is more curious is its craftsmanship. At the time of the young king's death, around 1323 BC, iron was still rare in Egypt and typically of low quality. There is little evidence of advanced ironworking prior to the Iron Age proper, which came centuries later. Yet this blade is expertly made, suggesting either lost techniques or external input far ahead of Egyptian metallurgy. Where did it come from? Who forged it? Some scholars believe the dagger was a diplomatic gift, perhaps from Mitanni or the Hittites, offered during the complex political marriages that marked the late 18th dynasty. Others suggest it was an heirloom, passed down from a time when meteorites were viewed not merely as celestial stones, but as messages from the gods. But again, the explanations feel partial, convenient. What if these artifacts were not simply trade goods, but the remnants of a deeper story? Some researchers have speculated that the foreign items found in royal tombs may be remnants of earlier, perhaps forgotten, cultural exchanges, echoes of a time when Egypt's elite may have shared more in common with distant civilizations than we assume. Could there have been a shared symbolic language, one not preserved in writing, but in craftsmanship and form? Others go further, suggesting that Egypt's contact with distant cultures may not have always been incidental, that some of these foreign objects were not imported, but recovered, artifacts of ancient migrations, or even remnants of lost civilizations whose memory faded into myth. Such ideas remain controversial. Archaeology demands caution, it demands context, and yet the context is sometimes missing. Why, for example, do some of these foreign objects appear only in royal tombs? If they were part of standard trade, why not more broadly distributed among the elite or the priesthood? Is it possible they were considered too powerful, too sacred, or too politically charged for general use? Were they tools, tokens, trophies? There is also the matter of how these objects were positioned. In some tombs, the foreign artifacts are found in places of prominence, laid directly beside the body of the king, or placed in shrines usually reserved for religious icons. In others, they are tucked away, hidden beneath more familiar relics. Was this reverence or secrecy? Did the ancient Egyptians themselves know the origins of these items? Or had they already become mysterious by the time they were interred, curiosities passed down through generations, their meanings obscured, but their power still intact? We may never know. The tombs have been looted. The records are incomplete. The meanings, in many cases, were never written at all. And yet the presence of these foreign artifacts lingers like a whisper at the edge of history. Reminders that Egypt, for all its grandeur and self-contained mythology, was not alone, that the Nile was one thread in a far wider web of ancient connection. What knowledge arrived with these objects? What hands passed them through the desert, across mountains, or over open sea? And how many more remain, still buried, waiting to be rediscovered? As the tomb doors close and the torches dim, the question remains: were these artifacts mere gifts or messages left behind, waiting to be understood? Temple alignments. As the foreign artifacts of distant lands rest in the silent hands of Egypt's buried kings, mysterious gifts or heirlooms of forgotten alliances, we turn our gaze upward to the stars, to the ancient sky that loomed unchanged above Egypt's sacred landscapes, and to the question, were Egypt's temples merely stone and ritual? Or were they also calendars, observatories, and cosmic instruments? Across Egypt, from the lush banks of the Nile to the sands of the southern border, great temples rise like petrified hymns to the divine. Karnak, Luxor, Abu Simbel, Dendera, Edfu, each with its own story, its own geometry, its own purpose. But a curious pattern emerges when one studies their orientation, not toward rivers or roads, but toward the heavens. Many of Egypt's most sacred temples are aligned with astonishing precision to celestial events, solstices, equinoxes, heliacal risings, and star transits. The most famous of these alignments occurs at the great temple of Abu Simbel, built by Ramesses II in the 13th century BC. Twice a year, on or near February 22nd and October 22nd, light enters the temple's inner sanctum and illuminates three of the four-seated statues within: Ramesses himself, the sun god Ra-Harakti, and the creator god Amun. Only the fourth figure, Ta, god of the underworld, remains in darkness. This event does not appear to be accidental. The timing may correspond to Ramesses' birthday and coronation, anchoring the king's earthly reign to the divine rhythm of the cosmos. But how was such precision achieved with only rudimentary tools, and in a structure carved deep into solid rock? Karnak, the sprawling temple complex dedicated to Amun in Thebes, offers another example. Its main axis is aligned to the winter solstice sunrise. On that day, sunlight floods the temple's central corridor, striking directly through the series of pylons, columns, and halls, as though unlocking a path to the gods. Other temples appear to track stellar events. The Temple of Hathor at Dendera, for instance, features detailed astronomical ceilings, zodiacs, planetary bodies, star maps that suggest an intimate knowledge of celestial movement. Some researchers argue that Dendera's orientation may correspond with the rising of Sirius, the brightest star in the night sky, whose annual appearance signaled the flooding of the Nile and marked the beginning of the Egyptian New Year. So how did they do it? Without telescopes or modern mathematics, how did ancient builders achieve such precision? One theory suggests that Egyptian priests were careful observers of the horizon, using long sight lines, shadow tracking, and repeated measurements over decades. The use of simple tools such as the merkit, a type of plumb line, and the bay, a sighting tool, might have allowed them to fix orientations based on the rising and setting points of key stars. But others suspect there's more at play. The recurrence of solar and stellar alignments across so many temples and over so many centuries suggests not just practical astronomy, but cosmology, a worldview in which architecture was inseparable from the heavens. The temple was not merely a place to worship the gods, it was a map of the universe, a mirror of divine order imposed upon the earth. Could the temples have functioned as part of a greater interconnected system? Some researchers point out that certain temples may align not just with celestial events, but with one another. Longitudinal and latitudinal parallels, astronomical triangulations, even potential ley lines have been proposed, though these ideas often fall outside mainstream scholarship. Still, they raise a tantalizing question. Were Egypt's sacred spaces part of a grand terrestrial network calibrated to track time, seasons, and the stars? Other theories draw connections between Egyptian temple alignments and myths of celestial rebirth. Osiris, the god of death and resurrection, was often associated with the constellation Orion. The star Sirius, identified with his sister and wife, Isis, rose just before the Nile flood, the annual act of rebirth for the land itself. Were temple alignments meant to reenact these mythic events? Were the beams of sunlight that pierce sanctuaries each solstice symbolic bursts of the divine within sacred stone? Still others propose that the temples were used for calendrical and agricultural purposes. By tracking solar and stellar cycles, priests could regulate planting, harvesting, and ritual festivals with uncanny precision, ensuring the survival of both crops and cultural order. In this view, astronomy was less about speculation and more about survival. And yet questions remain. Why are some temple alignments so precise while others are less consistent? Were certain sites repurposed or reoriented over time? Did alignment shift as religious focus moved from one deity to another? And more fundamentally, was the alignment of temples intended solely for human observation? Or were the gods themselves believed to descend along these shafts of light, these channels of energy that connected heaven and earth? The ancient Egyptians saw no sharp division between the physical and the spiritual. Light was not just illumination, it was life, power, presence. A temple oriented to a sunrise was not just catching the sun, it was receiving it, inviting it, honoring it. Today we stand in these sacred spaces and watch as sunlight creeps through stone corridors built thousands of years ago, touching the same places at the same moments year after year. We marvel at the precision. We study the angles, but we still don't fully understand the purpose. Were these alignments meant to guide the soul, to open portals, to mark the heartbeat of a universe the ancients believed they lived within, not apart from? As the stars wheel overhead, just as they did in the days of the pharaohs, the stones remain fixed, waiting. What deeper messages might they still hold? What alignments remain unnoticed, silent until the sky speaks again? Temple acoustics. As the sun's first light slices through a temple's stone corridor, perfectly aligned with a distant star or sacred date, it floods the sanctum with golden clarity. Yet, even as light guides the spirit, another quieter force may have shaped these ancient structures. Sound. Step inside an Egyptian temple and notice what happens. The outside world fades away. The air grows cool. The space narrows and silence begins to thicken. Not emptiness, but a presence. Then the smallest noise, a footstep, a whisper, echoes with unexpected clarity. A chant spoken at the right spot seems to travel, to deepen, to linger in the stone. Was this acoustic effect a byproduct of grand architecture? Or was it deliberate? Across the great ceremonial temples of ancient Egypt, Karnak, Luxor, Dendera, Edfu, there are patterns that invite the question. Long axial corridors, high vaulted ceilings, stone walls closely spaced to amplify resonance, enclosed sanctuaries with curious echo points. What role did sound play in these sacred spaces? Mainstream interpretations of temple design focus on symbolic geometry, solar alignments, and processional pathways. The temple was, in every sense, a model of the universe, its architecture reflecting mythic creation, its axis mirroring cosmic order. But perhaps sound was just as important, not merely incidental, but instrumental in shaping the experience of the divine. Ancient Egyptian rituals were far from silent. Inscriptions speak of chants, hymns, invocations, and the rhythmic intonation of sacred names. Sistrums, musical instruments used by priestesses, were shaken in religious ceremonies to appease the gods and dispel evil. Drums and clappers were used in funerary rites. The spoken word was believed to carry power, heka, the force of magic, especially when spoken in ritual cadence. Could the architecture of temples have been designed to magnify that power? Modern acoustical studies suggest that they may have been. In the Temple of Hathor at Dendera, researchers have noted specific reverberation patterns in the hypostyle halls, spaces where stone columns seem to catch and sustain sound. In the Oeran at Abbidos, an underground chamber built with massive granite blocks, certain frequencies produce strong standing waves. Chant at the right pitch and the room begins to vibrate around you. Was this a coincidence or a technology? In 2017, researchers conducted controlled acoustic experiments in several temples, measuring how sound moved through corridors and reflected off stone. They found that narrow passageways and enclosed sanctuaries were highly responsive to low frequencies. A human voice, especially when chanting vowel-rich phrases, could resonate powerfully, creating a physical sensation in the body. Some even speculate that these frequencies could alter consciousness, inducing a meditative or even trance-like state. If so, what were the priests and initiates experiencing during their rituals? Could the temple itself, its columns, its chambers, its carefully calculated voids, have been used as an instrument, a resonant body tuned to spiritual frequencies? Some researchers have drawn comparisons to other ancient sites around the world. At Malta's Hypogeum, a Neolithic underground temple, low tones resonate so intensely that the entire chamber seems to pulse. In Chavin de Huantar, in Peru, highland temples appear to channel sound through hidden ducts and stone galleries. Is it possible that ancient cultures independently discovered a sacred use of acoustics? In Egypt, this theory remains controversial. There are no surviving manuals on acoustic engineering, no explicit text describing sound-based rituals in detail, and yet the evidence is suggestive. In some temples, specific words or syllables appear in repetitive sequences, likely chanted aloud. Certain hieroglyphic spells contain rhythmic patterns, almost musical in nature, and the architecture itself, though massive and fixed, seems subtly designed to focus attention not just on sight, but on sound. Consider the Festival Hall of Thutmose, the third at Karnak. Its narrow, high-ceiling hall creates a tunnel-like effect where a voice might be funneled forward with precision. Or the inner sanctum of the Temple of Luxor, where whispers can be heard with startling clarity despite thick stone barriers. Could these have been places where the word became more than breath? Some go further still, speculating that sound was used not just for ceremony, but for transformation, that the right tones spoken in the right space could induce altered states of consciousness, visions, healings, communications with gods or ancestors. In this view, the temple was not just a house for a god, but a machine, a structure designed to shape perception, to harmonize the soul, to bridge the divide between mortal and divine. Skeptics argue there's no hard evidence to support these claims, that the acoustics are byproducts of materials and form, not intention. But this overlooks one crucial point. Ancient Egypt was a civilization of extraordinary intention. Every gesture, every inscription, every beam of light and placement of stone was loaded with meaning. Why not sound? Why not echo as prayer? The temples remain weathered but standing, their stone walls still humming with centuries of silence. And if you stand in the right place at the right time and speak not loudly but with care, you might hear it, a resonance, a whisper that stretches beyond the present. Could it be that ancient Egypt not only understood the power of sound, but built it into their holiest spaces? What else might the walls still remember if we only knew how to listen? The sealed compartments of scribe statues. As the echoes of ancient chants fade through the resonant halls of Egypt's sacred temples, we move now from sound to silence, from the grand spaces of gods to the intimate stillness of a seated figure captured forever in stone. These are the scribe statues, portraits of men frozen mid-thought, cross-legged, papyrus scroll upon their lap, eyes alert and knowing. But some of these statues hold more than memory. Within their carved forms, archaeologists have discovered something wholly unexpected: sealed compartments hidden deep within the stone. To the casual observer, the seated scribe is a familiar image from ancient Egypt. Calm, poised, attentive, neither king nor god, yet positioned with reverence in tombs, temples, and shrines. These were not simply works of portraiture. The scribe was a sacred figure, a keeper of words, rituals, and divine secrets. In a civilization where writing was seen as an extension of cosmic order, the scribes stood at the boundary between language and magic. Most statues are solid, their forms carved from limestone, wood, or granite, but a small number, discovered across a range of sites and dating from the Old Kingdom through to the Late Period, contain hidden cavities. These hollows, often accessed through a plug or trapdoor, sealed flush with the statue's surface, were not immediately visible. Some were only discovered during conservation or X-ray imaging centuries after excavation. Inside, the findings are as curious as the design itself. Small scrolls, miniature offerings, bundles of linen, bits of faience, even pieces of bone or hair. None are labeled, none are explained in accompanying inscriptions. Their purpose remains unknown. Why would an image of a scribe contain a secret compartment? One theory is that these cavities functioned as reliquaries, containers for sacred remains used in funerary rites or ancestor veneration. Perhaps the hair or bones were offerings or even remnants of the scribe himself, linking the statue more intimately to its subject. But this explanation doesn't hold in every case. Some compartments contain no human material, only symbolic objects. Another possibility is that the cavities were intended to house written texts, perhaps magical spells, private prayers, or ritual instructions. A statue of a scribe might then serve not only as a likeness, but as a vessel for knowledge, a literal container of wisdom. But if that were true, why seal the contents so thoroughly? And why offer no clues on the surface as to what lay within? In the most perplexing cases, the contents are entirely inert, small pebbles, sand, or scraps of linen that appear to serve no obvious ritual function. Could they be symbolic fillers? Or does their very simplicity mask a deeper purpose? Speculation has led some researchers to consider more esoteric possibilities. Could these sealed compartments have been intended to activate the statue, to bind it with a particular spirit or function? In Egyptian belief, statues were not inert objects, they were bodies, receptacles given voice through ritual, opened through the opening of the mouth ceremony, and fed with offerings as if they lived. Perhaps the contents of the cavity acted as the final ingredient in a metaphysical formula, an identity embedded within the stone. More fringe theorists suggest that the cavities may have been designed to conceal knowledge, lost writings perhaps, or encoded relics passed between generations of scribes. If the priesthood feared that certain information might be lost or corrupted, what better way to preserve it than within a sacred form, sealed and hidden in plain sight? But these ideas remain speculative. There are no records from ancient Egypt that explicitly mention the creation or purpose of hollow statues. No texts describe why a scribe might be carved with a hidden chamber, or what rituals accompanied the sealing of such objects. Were these practices part of a secret tradition kept within a narrow circle of temple scribes? Or are we misinterpreting something more practical, more mundane? Even the method of sealing raises questions. In several cases, the plugs used to seal the compartments are made of a different material than the statue itself. Granite within limestone, wood within plaster, suggesting the intent was not to hide the cavity permanently, but to protect it. Yet no evidence suggests these plugs were ever removed in antiquity. Whatever was placed inside was meant to remain untouched. Why? Were the contents sacred, dangerous, or simply never meant for the living? One particularly enigmatic example comes from a tomb near Saqqara, where a beautifully carved scribe statue was found with a compartment sealed behind the figure's shoulder. Inside were two tightly wrapped bundles of linen, each containing a tiny scroll fragment in a smooth polished stone. The text on the scroll was undecipherable, either faded beyond recognition or written in an unknown code. The stone, when tested, showed no markings and no mineral anomalies. What message, if any, lay within? And why was it entombed with the image of a man whose face we no longer recognize? As technology improves, more of these statues are being scanned and examined. But with every new discovery, the pattern only deepens the mystery. No two cavities are exactly alike. No two sets of contents tell the same story. There is no template, no formula, only questions. Were these compartments remnants of private devotion, fragments of magical thinking, preserved by a society that placed language at the heart of existence? Or do they point to a deeper tradition, one still obscured by the passage of time, waiting to be decoded? In the silence of museum galleries and storerooms, These statues sit still, eyes wide, hands poised eternally over their scrolls, watching, guarding. What truths did they once hold? And what might still lie sealed beneath the surface, just beyond reach and just beyond understanding? The legends of giant builders. As we leave behind the sealed compartments of silent scribes, those curious vessels of hidden knowledge, we now step into a far older whisper, a legend that lingers in shadowed corners of myth and memory. It is not found in temple inscriptions or royal decrees, but in stories passed through generations, recorded by foreign visitors, and hinted at in texts more ancient than empire itself. These are the legends of giant builders, beings of immense strength and scale, credited by some with the construction of Egypt's most enduring marvels. Stand before the Great Pyramid of Giza, or the immense pillars of Karnak, and one can understand why such tales endure. Blocks of limestone weighing 80 tons, obelisks cut from solid granite, transported hundreds of miles. Colossal statues of pharaohs that tower more than 60 feet in height. The question arises as naturally as the desert wind. How? The ancient Egyptians left some clues. Carvings of workers hauling statues, rolling stones, coordinating under the eye of overseers. Yet these depictions rarely match the scale of the projects themselves. The Great Pyramid alone contains over 2.3 million blocks, each weighing between 2 and 15 tons. No pulleys, cranes, or wheels were used, at least none that have survived, and no definitive written record exists explaining how these feats were achieved with the tools of the 3rd millennium BC. Enter the legend. Long after Egypt's golden age had faded, travelers and chroniclers from Greece, Rome, and the Arab world wrote of giants, of an ancient race of builders, titanic in stature, who raised the monuments in ages before kings. The 1st century AD historian Josephus references traditions in which the antediluvian patriarchs, giants descended from the Nephilim, constructed massive works of stone to preserve knowledge before a coming flood. Medieval Islamic writers like al-Makhrisi and Abd al-Latif echoed these ideas, suggesting that beings of extraordinary size and strength had once ruled Egypt, leaving behind impossible architecture. Even earlier in Egyptian myth itself, the gods and their first children, figures like Geb, Shu, and Osiris, were described as towering beings who walked the earth before the age of men. Their statues are often depicted at massive scale, their temples impossibly vast. Could these myths be echoes of a time when size and power were more than symbolic? Mainstream archaeology maintains that there is no evidence for such beings. No giant bones, no tools built for hands larger than our own. The Egyptians, they say, were masters of engineering, organization, and time. Thousands of laborers working in coordination under skilled planners could indeed move mountains. The legends of giants in this view are metaphor, myths born from awe and distance, the result of later cultures trying to comprehend the achievements of a lost civilization. But some anomalies continue to raise eyebrows. In the quarry at Aswan, an unfinished obelisk lies abandoned in place, cracked during the cutting process. It weighs an estimated 1,200 tons. Had it been completed and erected, it would have stood as the largest single piece of stone ever raised by human hands. Yet how such a stone could be transported, let alone lifted, remains unclear. No inscriptions accompany the site to explain the intended method. Other megalithic blocks, like those found at the Valley Temple of Kafra or beneath the Oeran at Abbidos, are so precisely cut and so perfectly placed that even with modern technology, replicating them would be a challenge. Some show no chisel marks. Some are fitted with such accuracy that a knife blade cannot slip between them. Were these achievements merely the product of forgotten engineering techniques, or do they point to something more mysterious? Some fringe theorists propose that the ancient builders, giant or not, possessed knowledge now lost to us, a different understanding of physics, sound, or material manipulation. Others suggest the legends may preserve a cultural memory of an earlier race, perhaps not giants in the literal sense, but a now vanished people of great ability, whose tools and techniques have disappeared under the sands of time. There are even accounts, though unverified, of massive skeletal remains unearthed and swiftly removed, never to be displayed in museums or scientific journals. Such stories often appear in early travel logs or apocryphal letters, but lack the documentation needed to move beyond folklore. Still, the idea persists, and perhaps it's not about bones or relics at all. Perhaps the enduring power of the giant builder myth lies in its ability to express a truth we still feel but cannot name. That the monuments of Egypt do not just defy time, they defy scale. That their creation required not just labor, but a vision so vast, so beyond ordinary human limits, that we instinctively reach for something larger to explain them. What if the idea of the giant is not about size but consciousness? A symbol of a people who could think on a monumental scale, who carved the earth with a patience measured in centuries, who lifted not just stone, but story. Today the giants are gone, if they ever lived. Their names are not carved on stelae, nor buried in golden coffins, but the structures remain. The temples still rise. The pyramids still cast their shadows on the sand, and the question still lingers in the silence between their stones. Who truly built these wonders? What hands raised the first blocks? What memory lies encoded in the very mass of the monuments? And what, if anything, might still be hidden beneath the myth?